Recording in progress.
Welcome, everybody, to the Planning Commission meeting for October 6th, 2022. This is the first time we're in person since March of 2020. So thanks for being here, and we're hybrid as well. So this is our first hybrid meeting, so hopefully we'll go pretty smoothly. Can we do the roll call?
Commissioner Chan,
Present.
Commissioner Del Negro,
Present.
Vice Chair Wong, Chair Davis.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Quigg is excused tonight.
Thank you. Can we do the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. Next up is the agenda review. Are we good with the order of the agenda, everybody? Okay. We have a couple of sets of minutes to approve. The first would be from June 29th. Do we have any? We've already had some perhaps come in, some changes to this.
I appreciated the redlining.
Okay.
I agree, the changes are fine for me.
Okay. We have a motion?
A motion to approve of the minutes for...
Don't forget your mic. Is it on? I can't see.
Okay. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for June 29th and September 19th.
We haven't talked about September 19th yet.
Okay,
Just-
let's
just
go with June
29th.
29th then.
Okay.
It's on? Testing? Oh,
Now we have to
motion, okay.
Go back to this.
Oh,
Okay, one for both up there, there. Close enough. All right, can we vote?
Ready for it?
There. All right,
Perfect. Motion passes 4-0.
all right. We have a second set for September 19th. Any comments, changes? Chris?
I have two comments, just
Okay.
clarifications. One was on the Hitta Musman noted, so this is on page 5 of 7. It looks like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sixth comment, it is italicized. Hitta Musman noted that during annual progress report, we will get credit for any housing that was built but not planned for. Did she say we will get credit for any housing that was planned for but not built? So that seems backwards to me.
It could be that way.
It
It
seems
could be
like-
that what we thought might be a prime spot for development, somebody built somewhere else. We didn't think of it, but it still got built? Is that?
Well, my understanding was that I asked a question about whether or not we get credit for whether or not we approve of planning, but it's not built
okay.
because of the interference of secondary things like high-speed rail.
Got it.
And so this seems backwards to me.
Okay. Can we just double check that for the future? Okay, all right.
And the second one was on page 4 of 7, the second to last line, Commissioner Del Negro agreed that we would want to leave this out due to a need for rezoning and lack of city control of property. I actually don't know if the city doesn't have control of property. I said lack of clarity on whether or not the city controls the property.
Noted.
So just add clarity. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes. So, I mean, most of the comments captured by other commissioners seemed pretty comprehensive. I thought something that I brought up in the last meeting that was pretty important didn't make into the minutes, which was I asked some questions about some of the sites being designated as 100% of certain income levels. You know, this site was designated for very low, this site was designated for low, this site was designated for moderate. To me, it's probably the most important part of the housing element of the draft housing element that I read that is open to criticism. So I think it would be worthwhile to like it, of all the things that were left out, like that seems kind of important to keep in. So
Okay, I can take these back and we can review them for next time.
Alan, do you have any comments?
No, no.
I'll just share one other. While this particular meeting might be a little different in that we are trying to capture a few things to hand off to council and everything, we're still shooting for something closer to action minutes. There's too much detail in here. Salient comments that are going to move forward. A question asked that was answered and it's done probably doesn't need to be in here. So if you're going to revise them anyway, if you could tighten it up a little, that would be fantastic. Okay, so
Of
we'll set
course.
these aside till next time or the future.
Yes, we will bring them back.
All righty. Oops, is that the right one? Yeah, okay. Public communication. This is the time set aside for the public to speak to us on a topic that is in our purview, but not on tonight's agenda. Do we have anybody that wants to speak? Not on the agenda.
There are no hands and we have no speaker slips.
All righty. Then we shall move on to our public hearing. The City of Millbrae General Plan Update, Downtown and El Camino Real Specific Plan, Zoning Text and Map Amendments. This is a public hearing to review the Millbrae 2040 General Plan Update, the Downtown El Camino Real Specific Plan, related zoning code amendments, and the updated Millbrae zoning map, and recommend that the Millbrae City Council, number 1, adopt the Millbrae 2040 General Plan Update, Downtown El Camino Real Specific Plan, and related zoning amendments in the updated Millbrae zoning map, and 2, certify the environmental impact report for the Millbrae 2040 General Plan, Downtown and El Camino Specific Plan. Roscoe, do you have a staff report for us?
Yes, good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Commission. Before we begin, I'd like to bring Commissioners' attention to two pieces of public correspondence that we received after the packet was prepared. One correspondence we received from Ms. Amy Lauer, and there were some comments related to 5.1 Parks and Recreation, 5.2, and then 5.4 and 5.5. Staff, with regards to section 5.1 in element 5, staff can, with response to that comment, we could include another policy in the RAC 12, which would be to the city shall prioritize social and cultural equity in the allocation of park and recreational resources. With regards to section 5.4, these were the distribution of the general plan was consistent with state law. We have distributed the policy to document to native tribes, and with 5.5, we already addressed that in the program B. So we'll summarize some of those recommendations that we include in the motion later tonight. And then additionally, the other piece of correspondence from Janet Fogarty in response to the general plan update in the housing element. The commenter was writing about a development in Millbrae Station Area Specific Plan, specifically the Millbrae Station, Sarah Station project. The plan and any project is subject to state laws, so regardless of whether or not each specific law is indicated in there, the project will have to adhere to state law. With the changing landscape of housing laws these days, there's just no way for us to keep up and include every single law in the plan. But rest assured that when the project goes through, it will be reviewed against the existing laws at that time.
Excellent, thank you.
Commissioner Davis, Chair Davis, and members of the Planning Commission, my name is Roscoe Mata. I'm the planning manager here at the Millbrae Community Development Department, and I'm joined by Nestor Guevara, who's the associate planner and project manager assisting with this effort, and then the consultant team, Minter Harnish, Jim Harnish from Minter Harnish Consultants. Next slide, please. The city's general plan effort and the specific plan is a team effort, and we've hired a great team today that assisted us through this effort throughout the past 5-6 years. Jim Harnish, as I mentioned earlier, of Minter Harnish, was the lead consultant, and we've had assistance with the specific plan from WRT and bottom lead design and planning. The infrastructure and financing plan was prepared by West Yost and ADE. And then regarding the California Environmental Quality Act consistency, that was prepared by Rincon and with the specific help of Darcy Kremen and Kelsey Bennett. And then for traffic and circulation, we have Kittleson and Associates that assisted. Yeah, it seems to be working now. It's a little glitch. So tonight, the objective is to receive a presentation regarding the 2040 Millbrae General Plan, the Downtown and El Camino Real Specific Plan, the Environmental Impact Report, and the associated zoning code amendments. And the objective is for the Plan Commission to make a formal recommendation to the City Council to certify the EIR and adopt the General Plan, Specific Plan, and the zoning code and map amendments. Just a brief background of the general plan update. The general plan was adopted in 1998. Subsequent to that, there were amendments to the housing element consistent with state law in 2006, 2013, and 2015, and to the circulation element in 2009. The general plan is required to be updated to ensure consistency with legal requirements in the city's long-range growth for the 20-year horizon. In 2015, we initiated the comprehensive general plan update and the downtown specific plan, and then also the environmental impact report. Okay, it's not working. So the general plan is it's an effort that is combined with other efforts such as the active transportation plan, as I mentioned, the specific plan, and then also the streetscape plan, which is a part of this specific plan. And so the general plan provides the overall policy framework that will guide the growth of the city over the next 20 years. And these plans all work together in concert to guide that growth in the future. And the process of this whole effort, kind of picking it up from where the plan first left off in 2021, we reinitiated and adopted the active transportation plan in early 2022. We reviewed and finalized the general plan update and specific plan. And then middle of this year, we released the EIR for publication and circulation. And then the public review drafts were also circulated to the community and the public. And then in late 2022, here we are today for the adoption of the plan and certification of the EIR. So as I mentioned, the city's general plan is the city's blueprint for the future growth of the city, and it's a requirement for every city in California. And it contains several elements, policies, and goals for the city and what we want to achieve and how we want to be in the next 20 years. We have certainly implementation measures that will implement those goals and policies. And we implement state regulations, include comments that we receive from the public, and then also in consideration with the public infrastructure assessment. And so now I'm going to hand it over to the consultant team, Jim Harnish, and then speak a little bit more about the general plan and the related elements.
Great, thanks, Roscoe. I don't think I'm even going to try the clicker because they always are a problem for me anyway, so I'll depend on Christy. Chair Davis and members of the commission, my name is Jim Harnish. I'm the principal and owner of Minter Harnish and also the project director for the overall project, which has had 4 components. We're going to present 3 of them to you tonight: the general plan, the downtown El Camino Real specific plan, and the EIR. As Roscoe mentioned earlier, part of this project was the active transportation plan that was adopted earlier this year by you. So we have 4 different projects as a part of this overall project. Okay. Actually, I might maybe, oh, okay, I'll just hold it. So the general plan has several parts. We have a vision and guiding principles, and then the elements, main elements are goals and policies, and then implementation programs. We start off with establishing a vision for the project. This is kind of a long-range idea about what the community, commission, and council would like the city to be like in essentially 20 years. And so this is a vision statement. We worked with a lot of folks early on in the project to come up with. And I won't read it, but I think you've had a chance to see it before. It reflects some really broad, high-level expectations for change and improvement in the community. The vision is essentially implemented through the guiding the guiding principles, which I describe them as kind of an umbrella for the whole rest of the general plan. All of the goals and policies and programs in the general plan should be consistent with the guiding principles, and so these are sometimes called objectives, but they're big ideas about these key subjects that are important to the city. And if you notice, they generally track the topics in the different elements of the general plan. So it covers all aspects of that, of course, but they generally track that. So this general plan has 8 elements. State law requires every city and county general plan to have 7 basic elements: land use, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, safety, and noise. Those are the basic element requirements. All of the cities and counties in the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District have to prepare an air quality element. And then the newest element requirement is the environmental justice element. It's not required of all cities and counties, only those that meet a threshold that's established through what's called the Cal Virus Screen 4.0. It's a measure, a pollutant education and a cultural measure that the Cal EPA has established for measuring a whole range of things, but it's the environmental justice at its root is addressing environmental issues that unfairly impact low-income communities of color. That's the base. Not all cities and counties are required to prepare an environmental justice element. Millbrae is not required. You don't meet the threshold for those environmental impacts. However, we included a section in the land use element on environmental justice issues that typically deal with land use issues where you might place residential uses in areas that are subject to pollution. In the Bay Area, it's typically near freeways or in areas that have experienced previous pollution. And also access to the public decision-making process. So we do, even though it wasn't required of the city, we've included that, and this was really in consultation with the city staff. Next slide. So I'm going to just briefly touch on each one of the 8 elements. You've heard part of this presentation before in your study sessions earlier, and I don't want to cover all the old ground, but I want to summarize this for you and for the folks that are watching the hearing. So the land use elements, generally considered the most important element in the general plan, although state law requires that all elements are considered of equal weight, and all elements have to be internally consistent with each other. So typically, though, land use is looked at as the most important one because it deals with the community growth and change and development more explicitly than all the other elements. So it includes standards for residential density and building intensity, which are generally measured by floor area ratio. We can go into that later if you want, but it gets relatively, it's planarese and technical. The general plan also sets the scene for the downtown El Camino Real specific plan, which is the key component of the general plan land uses. And I'll talk about that in a second. Then there's also an issue or a focus on infrastructure and facilities. So this is the general plan land use map. Identifies all the different land uses in the land use element. These are defined in more detail, have some development standards associated with them. For this city, virtually all of the land use change from your existing general plan occurs in the specific plan areas. Already occurred with the station area plan that amended the general plan land uses in the station area plan area. Now the downtown El Camino Real specific plan really focuses most of the growth and change within that quarter. In part, this is logical because most of the rest of the city is low density, single family residential that's largely built out. You will see change, but of a much smaller magnitude in those areas. Next slide. Mobility and circulation, key element, and there's a pairing with land use and circulation because the circulation plan or element really provides access to the land uses. And there is legal cases that say you have to have a circulation element that is matched to your land use so that you can people can get to and from all the land uses that you're planning. The circulation now in particular has an emphasis on complete streets, which is not just vehicle focused, but it's focused on transit, on alternative transportation means, so that there is a broader focus from the original idea, which was how do you get cars around. Economic development, it's an optional element, very important. Many cities and counties add economic development elements because that's a key driver within most communities, a major concern. And so this kind of sets the scene for economic actions later on. It's got a robust implementation program, but it addresses the broad issues of business attraction and retention of and other economic development issues. Next slide. Recreation, arts, culture. This is pretty much an optional element, but it does touch on open space, recreational open space. There are 4 different types of open space, and this addresses one of them. But this is another really important issue. Early on, we discovered as we went through the planning and design charrette as a early part of the outreach and engagement program here, that it was clear that culture and the arts are really important to this community, and so that was a genesis for developing goals and policies and programs to enhance all of the activities that have already been going on in this city. Next slide. Natural resource conservation element. This is focused on the open space and conservation issues, also deal with water conservation, air quality, but it's the most environmentally oriented of the elements. You'll find in the presentation by Kelsey on the EIR that there's a lot of focus on the mitigating effects that this element has on potential environmental impacts. So it's a kind of more environmental quality focus than the other elements. Next slide. Health, safety, hazardous materials. This is the element that includes noise and safety element, but also addresses a whole range of other issues dealing with airport-related hazards, hazardous waste and materials, seismic hazards. And obviously, these are key issues in any planning that the city does. And so this element tends to moderate whatever the land use planning is, or dovetails with it, to ensure that the growth that is occurring in the city is not exposing people to hazardous circumstances. So that's in a nutshell. That's the general plan. The next step and the last step is hearing on November 15th at the City Council, where hopefully the plan will be adopted, and then you'll, in part of your role as Planning Commission, help implement the plans. So, I think, Roscoe, we would wait for questions to the end of the presentation. Okay, that sounds great. So, the next presentation is going to be on the specific plan, and Jim Stickley, who is he in Australia or India? India. Jim Stickley's on a 4-month sabbatical where he's visiting a number of countries around the world, doing research on sustainability, and working with other countries and universities to really kind of expand our understanding of how other folks are dealing with those issues. So Jim is appearing remotely and will do the presentation on the specific plan.
Great, thanks, Jim. Good evening, everyone. Good morning from Pune, India. And as Jim said, I'm here on a research sabbatical studying urban resilience in different geographies, and actually talking about Millbrae a lot in the various interchanges I'm having with academics and professionals, and using this as an example of some of the state-of-the-art of what we're doing in our practice. So this specific plan is getting a lot of international exposure and is being very well received. So it's really thrilling to be at this stage in the process. I want to recognize Poonam Narkar, who is the senior planner and project manager for WRT that's been working together with me on this, and sort of overseeing all of the day-to-day coordination of, as Roscoe said, quite a lengthy process that we've now come to this point, and just really excited to be at this stage of the process. So next slide, please. So the downtown and El Camino Real specific plan is the purpose of it is to establish a vision for the downtown district, which is the darker red color, and then the El Camino Real corridor, which is the long sort of pink corridor. And so this is really to provide a roadmap for future growth for these specific zones, and in complement to the station area specific plan, which you see at the lower part of the image in beige. So that plan is finished and adopted, and then the new specific plan, which covers these two zones, will complement that plan in terms of providing this roadmap for future growth. Next slide. And sorry, just moving my little mosaic around. So these are the components of the specific plan. It starts with vision, goals, and policies, then establishes a plan framework, which I'll talk about, land use regulations and development standards to make sure that the specifics of the plan, the details of the plan, are implemented as envisioned. It addresses circulation and parking, quite an important component of the plan for some of the reasons that Jim Harnish just stated. It addresses infrastructure and implementation. What are the clear next actions in order to implement this plan? And then this appendix is actually quite a significant piece. It's a whole streetscape plan for both El Camino Real and Broadway. So often this exists as a whole separate document and plan. It's quite detailed. I'll go into a few of those details, but it's the format for for this regulating document is that it appears as an appendix to the specific plan, and indeed is very complementary to the framework elements of the specific plan. Next slide. So really the vision of the specific plan is to create a livable and vibrant districts, the downtown and its adjacent districts within the specific plan area in planning for the future growth of the city. The plan offers a mix of regionally and local serving uses, a range of housing choices at different income levels. Whoops, next slide, please. Stay back on that slide. Office space, which there's a lot of growth potential for, as well as residential, retail, cultural amenities, and entertainment, and all configured in ways that really improve the quality of life in downtown Millbrae. The plan also envisions a variety of safe and well-designed public spaces, as well as buildings with high-quality architecture. And we go into some level of detail in the plan about how we get that quality that everyone desires in the future development. Next slide, please. So the specific plan goals and policies, this slide summarizes the different categories of goals and policies under land use. It's really cultivating pedestrian-oriented mixed use, both in the downtown and along the El Camino Real corridor, that supports vibrant commercial activity, maximizes transit use, enhances quality of life, and is well scaled to the neighborhoods. An urban design component, which creates districts, distinct districts with distinct characters, and those characters are different depending on whether you're in the downtown proper, along Broadway, or along the El Camino Real corridor. It has a lot of emphasis on housing with a wide range of affordable and accessible housing near transit. It addresses city image and programming. What is the sense of place that's desired here? What is the character of Millbrae, and how is that achieved through this specific plan? And then the circulation, TDM, and parking, as Jim mentioned, is a really important component of this, sort of backing away from a sort of a preeminent emphasis on automobile travel and balancing that out with other modes of travel, managing parking in a sensible, well-managed way. So that component of the plan got a lot of work, a lot of attention, and we think we've achieved a good balance between those modes. And then finally, the open space and public realm component of the plan. Public realm being largely the street corridors and the public space within that. So trying to carve out more space for social activities, commerce, outdoor dining and whatnot, but also other key open spaces that are a part of that network. Next slide, please. So the specific plan framework, which is composed of 3 elements, the land use and urban design framework, the public realm and streetscape framework, and the circulation framework, and I'll talk about each of those briefly. But together, they really guide the character of the infill, the streetscape, and the public realm. And the way we looked at this is that there are these 4 distinct zones represented by these color bubbles. The first zone just north of the station area is the downtown district. And this is a really important identity area for the community. It has a fine grain, it has a scale along Broadway, but also along the frontage streets along El Camino Real. So this peach-colored area is the extent of where those frontage streets are, and we really see those as a complement to the pedestrian environment extending from Broadway. The center bubble is what we're calling a community anchor, so it has a commercial emphasis. There could be larger floor plate retail in this area. There could be hotel and conference. So it's really meant to be a sort of a destination in the mid corridor here. And then slowly transitioning to residential. So this northern part of the corridor in yellow is a residential neighborhood. It doesn't have as much retail on the ground floor. It has a lot of residential entrances and spaces on the ground floor that are geared towards the residents. It has stoops, so it's a different way of generating sort of that vibrancy along the corridor, but in a much more residential mix of uses. And then finally at the north end, the neighborhood anchor. This is sort of the little destination for the neighborhood, not as much from regional visitors because it's more distant from the station, but something serving the neighborhood, easily accessible by walking, and has ground floor retail and other services that serve the neighborhood. So next slide. So these are the layers of the plan, the public realm and streetscape framework on the left, the circulation framework on the right, and these really work very much together. So we want to ensure that circulation, even by vehicles, is still, smooth running, that we're addressing the capacities needed, but that traffic is calmed, and we're balancing it out with these other modes, with bicycle, with transit, and with pedestrian links. So really developing that network more fully into a well-functioning and safe network with proper street crossings, safe crossings, alternate routes for both pedestrian and bike if they choose to circulate not on El Camino Real but on other parallel streets, and then connecting those to important public spaces, as you can see on the diagram to the left. And then in the next slide, the land use component of the framework. So we'll get there in a second. But the land use to ensure all of the things, sorry, you can go to the next slide. So to ensure, the kinds of things that we've talked about in terms of quality of life and respecting scale and things of that nature, we've designated all of these different categories of the different types of development that could go in downtown. So downtown mixed use, DMU, corridor mixed use, et cetera. And I'll get into each one of these in a little bit more detail in the next slide. So these are the configurations of the land use designations. So the downtown mixed use, or DMU, is the orange area that's in that lower downtown section on either side of Broadway, but also along the frontage streets along El Camino Real. It has a distinct mix of uses emphasizing ground floor retail, tends to be lower in scale to respect the scale of Broadway and the frontage streets. And then the corridor mixed use is the blue, and that stretches all along the sort of the lower half up into the midsection of El Camino Real. This is a more permissive zone, if you will. It allows higher building heights, both of residential and office, and there is some degree of flexibility as to which ones of those are encouraged. And then going from there, we get into the neighborhood commercial mixed use, which is the blue area clear at the northern end that I described before, sort of the destination for the neighborhood. And then the orange is the residential focused mixed use. So this, does allow some commercial, it's not prohibited, but it's really encouraging a largely residential use of higher density, higher FARs allowable in that northern section of El Camino Real. And next slide. So to ensure that all this happens in the way that we want, there are this whole series of development standards and guidelines, and those are coded with the DSG 1, 2, 3, et cetera. And they very specifically address these different aspects of development. So the intensity, density, and height, which we gave a lot of attention and study to. I'll talk about that in a second. The building setbacks, the massing and modulation, active frontage. Where do we want active frontage? Where do we not necessarily want to extend that? Off-street vehicular and bike parking, loading access, public realm design, open space and private realm, and public art, which turns out to be quite an important element to the community. So all of these are addressed very specifically in the standards and guidelines. Next slide. And the building height. So we worked a lot on this diagram. We actually developed a 3D model and worked with that a lot, just manipulating it, changing heights. We had study sessions with all of you, taking into account a lot of comments and adjustments. And the 3D model proved to be a really great and productive working tool to just really dial it in and get it right. Make sure that we had the right scale of development in the right places, that we were respecting community character where needed, respecting neighborhood edges where those step downs were needed. And then this is the heights that resulted from all of that study. And next slide. So things like the transition of building masses to adjacent neighborhoods. This actually doesn't happen in a lot of areas, but there are a few key places where the new development comes up against single family neighborhoods, sometimes with a street separating the two and sometimes not. So in the Hemlock area, for example, just paying really close attention to stepping back these buildings on El Camino Real so that they give light and space to the residents on Hemlock Avenue. And then in the lower diagram, the step down from higher allowable heights on El Camino Real, because it's a wider corridor, it can sort of take higher heights and still feel human in scale because of the width of the corridor, but really stepping down then on the Broadway side on the left to make sure that those buildings are in scale with that corridor, which is much narrower. So a lot of manipulation and testing and refinement happened to try to really dial these in and get them right. Next slide. And then massing and modulation. So we don't want to just have development that puts blocky buildings out there. So how do we start to get some of this articulation, some of the facade variation, both height variation, but also the ins and outs of the facade that give these buildings sort of a human scale and breaks it down and ensures the proper character. So a lot of attention to that as well. In the next slide, some photo examples of what some of that massing and modulation looks like in the next slide. So those are some photo examples of some of those modulation standards, height, facade articulation, etc. Next slide. And then active frontage. There's definitely a danger of overwhelming the ground floor with retail and then having a lot of vacant retail space. So we really wanted to be judicious about where the retail goes, put it where it really counts. So that's really along Broadway and along the frontage streets, but with just a few points along El Camino Real where where there are important crossing or important changes in land use, some corner retail designations there. So really trying to use that active frontage designation where it counts. Next slide. And then, really looking in detail about what that frontage looks like and how it functions on the left. So breaking down the building frontages into, the frontage zone, the pedestrian zone, the public amenity zone, where we can get robust street tree programs. The frontage zone, we can have outdoor dining space that can be a complement to parklet spaces that occur in the parking lane, or what we're calling the the flexible use curb lane. It's not only for parking. And then some attention to public art, the kinds of art that we can bring in to really enrich these public spaces in downtown. Next slide. And then the circulation, TDM, and parking, again, really important component. How do we rebalance the equation here to create these more pedestrian corridors, both on Broadway, but also on El Camino Real? How do we complement that with transportation demand management policies that can be implemented by individual developers by providing, on-site parking, shared parking, and bicycle facilities, et cetera. And then how do we manage our parking overall so that we're still getting, the needed function for private vehicle parking? And then we get into a lot more detail on each of these in the streetscape plan. Next slide. These are just some of the strategies that I just mentioned on the parking and the TDM. So I think we can go ahead and progress to the next slide. And then implementation, where do we go from here? This doesn't want to be a plan that sits on the shelf. It wants to spark action. And so there are specific actions that are stated in priorities, and then also describes funding mechanisms. That's an important part of getting these initiatives going, is to be clear on what the funding mechanisms and financing tools are. And so we go into some level of detail on that as well. Next slide. So I'll try to be quick with the streetscape plan, but really it's all about creating lively, pedestrian-oriented downtown that supports higher density mixed-use development. And we do this by better supporting commercial activities, wider sidewalks on Broadway. And I'll describe how we get wider sidewalks on Broadway in a second. And on El Camino Real, really transforming this into a grand boulevard. Now it's a corridor that is, fairly generic in its character. It's very car oriented. So how do we transform it into something that feels like this, what had become sort of a rallying image for our work, which is the Boulevard Saint-Germain in Paris? How do we get something that is pedestrian oriented, that's lively, vibrant, active at the street level, yet still accommodating taller development on the edges, bringing shade and comfort and safety. So I'll describe just very briefly how we're doing that in each corridor. Next slide. So the streetscape plan objectives are about improving pedestrian and bike safety, about accommodating multimodal transit. So a lot of attention to the bus, their stops, their efficiency, micromobility, creating an identifiable character, as I said, but that's very different on Broadway than it is on El Camino Real. So two very distinct and different characters. Establishing dynamic and varied pedestrian experience, and then integrating green infrastructure. Big component here. How do we really have a robust greening strategy that's really going to transform these corridors into these shady, pleasant places to live and to hang out? Next slide. So for Broadway, the big move here is really shifting from the diagonal parking to parallel parking, and it really opens up quite a significant amount of space for the sidewalks, and it allows those to accommodate much more activity in terms of walking, socializing, outdoor dining, etc. That with the complement of street furnishings, of street tree program, keeping the palms. Those are a distinctive element for Millbrae, part of its identity. So really keeping those as the iconic punctuation, if you will, along the corridor, but complementing those with shade trees to provide a shady environment along the corridor. Next slide. So you can see how that manifests all along the corridor, consistent shade trees, wider sidewalks, and, you know, the palms with expanded planting areas for them at the intersections. Next slide. And then El Camino Real, really quite a dramatic transformation. The big move here is going from 3 lanes in each direction to 2 lanes. So there's a lot of debate around that. This is where we landed. And in making that decision, it really opens up a significant amount of space to institute protected bike lanes, to widen sidewalks, and to have some really efficient and well-functioning transit stops. So you can see a view at the bottom. I think we actually have a larger view in the next slide. So let's go to that. So here you can see the effect of that on El Camino Real. A lot more greening, so really consistent street trees all along the corridor. So robust greening strategies should make a big difference here. And then the additional space created by the lane reduction for protected bike lanes, which you can see here, and for the widened sidewalks. And next slide, please. So this is a view of El Camino Real transformation. This is actually along the frontage road. We're also switching from diagonal to parallel parking on the frontage road areas. So that provides quite a significant additional space for sidewalks in those areas. And in the next slide, here you can see, again, how this is manifesting. You can see the transit bulbs coming out, so long, spacious transit stops on the far side of intersections, plenty of room for waiting and comfort for the buses. And then just the overall view here in the next slide. And then this is a section of El Camino Real without the frontage road. So we have parking protected bike lanes. And we have 2 different kinds of bike lanes. Parking protected, where the bike lines are protected by the row of parked cars, as here. But then we also have the option to have the parking lane, or as I said before, the multi-use curb lane next to the sidewalk so that it can function for a number of different functions like parklets and deliveries and so forth that, that complement the sidewalk uses. Next slide. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey. So thank you very much for your time. And I look forward to questions at the end.
I'm going to do the next slide thing too, if you don't mind. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Kelsey Bennett with Rincon Consultants, and I'm accompanied this evening by my colleague Leslie Trejo. And together we manage the preparation of the environmental impact report for both the general plan and the specific plan combined. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not close enough. Should I repeat? My name is Kelsey Bennett, and I'm joined today by my colleague Leslie Trejo, and we're with Rincon Consultants, and together we manage preparation of the environmental impact report for both the general plan and the specific plan that you've been hearing the summaries of tonight. Next slide, please. So the environmental topics analyzed in the EIR, they're consistent with the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA as I'll refer to it moving forward, 2022 guidelines, and they were impacts were assessed at both the plans, plural, and cumulative level for these various topics. And for those at home, I'm just going to read through quickly who aren't seeing maybe the screen. Aesthetics, air quality, biological, agricultural, and forestry resources, cultural and tribal cultural resources, geology, soils, and mineral resources, greenhouse gas or GHG emissions and energy, hydrology and water quality, hazards, hazardous materials, and wildfire, land use planning, population and housing, noise, public services and recreation, transportation, and finally utilities and service systems. Next slide, please. Before I get into the summary of findings and the associated mitigation measures, wanted to start with the fact that since the changes in land uses associated with implementation of the general plan would occur within the specific plan area, primarily, that the following findings and mitigation measures from the EIR would apply to both the general plan and the specific plan. In addition, wanted to mention that, because we're going to start off going through what were the significant unavoidable impacts determined as the conclusions in the environmental impact report, that while the plans and their policies are primarily self-mitigating, that, however, this is a programmatic, overarching environmental impact report that has to encompass and capture any and all possible environmental impacts, and conservatively concludes the most potentially adverse impact that could happen for any future project across the entire specific plan, since future project details are not known at this time. So specifically, and actually I'll have you go to the next slide, please. I want to go through it in terms of the mitigation measures. So for impacts that had significance findings, we still provided mitigation measures to lessen the impacts, but again, just did not reach below the significance level. So specifically for air quality, for construction and operational impacts related to criteria pollutant emissions linked to the anticipated increase in vehicle miles traveled, this first mitigation measure is to implement Bay Area Air Quality Management District basic construction mitigation measures. For the topic of cultural resources, specifically construction impacts related to the potential to result in a change in significance of a known or not yet known historical resource, we have this next mitigation measure, CR1, about preparing historic resource evaluations for future projects involving buildings 45 years or older and implementing any resultant identified mitigation as a result of those evaluations. For greenhouse gas or GHG emissions, for the operational impacts related to contribution of GHG emissions and the consistency with GHG reduction plans. And once the mitigation measure of adopting and implementing CEQA GHG emissions thresholds, and one that's not yet listed here for that got unfortunately left out, for updating the Millbrae, the existing cap, to have a minor update to include the meeting of the state required 2045 carbon neutrality target. Once those are achieved, then this impact would go from significant to less significant once those are accomplished. For hazards, for operational impacts related to excessive aviation noise exposure due to proximity to SFO that you can do nothing about, there are no feasible mitigation measures for that exact reason. For noise, piggybacking on the issues of related to proximity to SFO, for consistency with noise land use compatibility standards due to that proximity, as well as future potential construction impacts related to noise and vibration temporary during construction, as well as operational related stationary noise related to increased vehicles on roads and roadway noise. We have the mitigation measures here, noise 1 through 4, to conduct construction and stationary noise analyses for each project, and to prepare and implement stationary operational noise threshold at the city level, and to also at the project level conduct stationary operational noise analysis. And finally, for these significant impacts for transportation, specifically related to operational impacts, that is due to the anticipated increase in vehicle miles traveled. And with this mitigation measure here identified, saying to prepare and implement a transportation demand management plan and the associated transportation demand programs. And again, that would be at each project level. Next slide, please. In addition, in the EIR, there were a handful of less than significant with mitigation conclusions. So these topics and mitigation measures I'm going to go through here were able to be successfully reducing those impacts to a less than significant level. So for aesthetics, specifically operational impacts related to lighting, just associated with densification as desired in the specific plan area. And to mitigate that, the mitigation is to adopt and implement a city lighting standards. For air quality, for construction impacts related to pollutant emissions near sensitive receptors, the mitigation for that is to conduct, for each project, a construction health risk assessment when deemed necessary, and when they're in proximity to sensitive receptors. For biological resources, during construction, there's the potential to disturb existing birds and roosting bats and their nests. And for the mitigation for that, it's a common mitigation for pre-construction bird surveys and avoidance and notification, and same thing for the roosting bats, surveys, avoidance, and notification prior to implementing the construction activities. For cultural resources, for construction impacts related to potential disturbance of unknown archaeological or tribal cultural resources, there are 3 mitigation measures identified here: to conduct an archaeological resources assessment prior to project approval, to stop work in the event of unanticipated cultural resource discovery during construction, and finally to suspend work around a tribal cultural resource that may be identified during construction. And for geology and soils, we identified construction impacts related to the potential disturbance of unknown paleontological resources. And for this, the identified mitigation measure was to add a general plan policy about the protection of paleontological resources at the project level. And then finally, for transportation, for construction impacts related to roadway circulation system accommodation of additional vehicle trips, the mitigation identified to reduce that to less significant is to prepare and implement construction traffic management plans, again, at the project level. And that is the quickest summary of an EIR I think that you can do. Happy to take your questions, though, later. Nestor.
So good evening, everyone. I'm Nestor Guevara, Associate Planner here at the City of Millbrae. And tonight I'll be going through the zoning code amendments related to the general plan and the specific plan. Next slide, please. So the implementation of the policies, the programs, and the development standards for both the general plan and the specific plan are achieved through the zoning code amendments. These are found as attachment 9, I believe, of your packet, and I'll just go through some of them tonight. Number 1, revising Millbrae Zoning Code Section 10.05.0410 Land Use Table to repeal the downtown improvement area and Grand Boulevard Plan development and replace it with a downtown and El Camino Real specific plan. Number 2, to replace the downtown improvement area in Article 11 with a downtown and El Camino Real specific plan. Next slide, please. Number 3, to repeal the Grand Boulevard Plan development in Article 16 and replace it with the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan consistency. And number 4, to include language referring to the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan consistency in zoning district sections R1LL, R1, R2, R3, C for commercial, I industrial, and public facilities articles. Next slide, please. Here you see the updated zoning map, which you find as article or attachment number 10 of the packet. It now shows the downtown and El Camino Real specific plan and the land use designation zones there. There's also, as attachment 11, the zoning map land use changes, or zoning changes, I should say, which details all the zoning, all the parcels that are being changed outside of the specific plan, as well as the specific plan area itself. And next slide, please. And with that said, the Planning Commission recommendation for tonight is that staff recommends that the Planning Commission hold a public meeting on the Millbrae 2040 General Plan Update, the Downtown and El Camino Real specific plan, related zoning code amendments, and the updated Millbrae zoning map, and recommend that the Millbrae City Council, 1, adopt the Millbrae 2040 General Plan Update, Downtown and El Camino Real specific plan, related zoning code amendments, and the updated Millbrae zoning map, and 2, certify the environmental impact report for the Millbrae 2040 general plan and the downtown and El Camino Real specific plan. Next slide, please. With that said, city staff as well as the consultant team is here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much to all of you. Anybody? Yeah? It is on. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you, all of you. And do we have any questions? You want to start? Start over there. Start over there. Nathan, do you want to start? You have any questions?
I would be open to opening the public hearing first before asking questions.
Normally we get the just clarifying questions out. We can ask more questions during discussion if you want.
Yeah, most of the questions I have are more substantive than clarifying, I think, so.
All right.
Separated them out, so.
Okay.
I haven't separated them out, so.
Okay, you want to go?
Well, I think if we're going to be splitting them up, I'd go at the end of public comment, but if we're not, I'm happy to go now.
Okay, and then it's me, so why don't we start here? Thanks, everybody, for putting in all this work. It's been so many years in the development. Question for, I guess, the city and the project managers is just a little bit alluding to the timing of this and the, it started 7 years ago, it appears, this process. It's been a very lengthy process. And, a lot of good work's been done in this. And so it seems like we're reaching the finish line. And it sounds like we're going through this meeting to adopt these plans and move it on to city council. There's been a lot of public input, a whole lengthy process. But can you explain the process for incorporating the final comments? This is the first time Planning Commission's seen all these packages, all the comments that have come in, all the revisions. And so I'd consider this maybe like final draft. And should we be reviewing this and giving you comments to have a final set of comments? And then also, I'm sure the city council may have final comments and questions. So will there be a process for addressing all these comments, questions, incorporating them into the final version? Because some of these are marked draft, and then closing it off. So what's the timing, the schedule, and the availability for providing these comments?
Sure. So tonight, the commission is being requested to provide a recommendation to the city council to adopt the plans and certify this EIR. And the comments that we'll be receiving tonight will be incorporated. The ones that are that require revisions to the plan will be incorporated and forward to the city council. The city council will provide comments at a future meeting, and then the city council will then at some point make a motion to adopt the plans, incorporating any revisions and comments at that public hearing. So to answer your question, we are still seeing input tonight, and so and if there's any comments and any changes that the commission seems necessary, then we can have that discussion, and any changes need to be made into the motion.
Okay, so if we do have these comments, I guess they'll be compiled by the city staff, my understanding, and then changes may be made and passed on to the city council. Might be good for the planning commission at some point after giving these comments, and then you compiling them, city staff, making any changes for us to review it for completeness again before going back to the final review by city council. And then also, I think we're trying to minimize the city council sending it back again to go through revisions, or we want to make sure it's complete and we address their concerns. But obviously, they may have something that we may miss, so then it may go through another round again. So you may want to, I guess, create a schedule and solicit comments from us as well as the city council, and then make the revisions into a final package before it finally gets adopted by all parties. It may make sense to think about that.
Well, the recommendation tonight is for the commission to make a motion to recommend that the city council adopt the plan. We've had several study sessions with the city council and planning commission. The public review draft has been available since June. And so what we're looking for tonight is that the commission have a productive and constructive dialogue on the plans, and then any changes, that were discussed during the study sessions have already been incorporated into the plans.
Okay, so I don't want to belabor the point, but I would recommend another review after you compile the comments here tonight and any others submitted by the Planning Commission, and then also give the City Council a chance to have an opportunity to comment and make changes also. So that's one general comment that I wanted to point out for this process here. I guess we can go into more specific comments, but that's just a clarifying question. I guess one clarifying question for the EIR document. I know it's gone through a public review process already. But it mentions a lot about baseline noise, baseline lighting. Given that, our cities, it's basically been built out and impacted by a lot of the infrastructure that's gone around by the airport, by train, Caltrain, BART, et cetera. What is our baseline? Can we get back to an original baseline like native environment? Because if we go to a baseline that incorporates the airport, there's just tremendous lighting that's put across the city at night just by the airport. You can't see any stars, and some closer to the airport, there's light that's lit up the sky. So if we are looking at an EIR, what are we addressing? Are we just addressing building construction on El Camino, or are we looking at the entirety of the city and how we can reduce the baseline that we have right now? And we're talking about noise, noise from the freeway, the airport, wind from clearing all the trees. The plans mentioned that it used to be farmland. So I imagine all the native vegetation and the trees and the native landscape has been drastically altered. So what are we talking about the baseline, and can we improve upon the baseline? Noise, wind, lighting, et cetera, environment.
So when an environmental impact report refers to a baseline, it means the existing conditions baseline at the time the EIR was started, aka when the notice of preparation to prepare the EIR was issued. That was in December 2021. I had to think about what year we were in for a second. December 2021. So the purpose of the environmental impact report is to analyze the net change in physical, environmental impacts against that baseline. So the goal is never to get you back to what you're thinking, what maybe you were alluding to about some kind of pre-people baseline or pre-airport baseline. So just comparison of if you implemented these two plans against your baseline of basically December 2021, how things existed in the city in terms of the environment, in terms of all those different topics addressed in the EIR.
Okay,
Does that
thank
help?
you.
Yeah.
I can go through this starting kind of across each of the attachments in order, just trying to get through some points of clarification. I think this is a good time to do that before we get into, okay. So, well, I'm going to start off with attachment 3. I'm looking at section 2, the second paragraph. I had a real hard time understanding what this second paragraph was trying to say. By facilitating the construction of ADUs and multifamily dwelling units, the city is supporting infill and higher density development along El Camino Real. Those are two separate things, correct? ADUs are not along El Camino Real. That's one element, and the high density housing is the second element. I think that paragraph needs to be rewritten to be clear that these are two separate, not a run-on sentence indicating that they're the same thing. I'll be quick here. Going up to an issue that I found across a lot of the documents was we refer to tree canopies a lot. We don't actually refer to our skyline of trees and the edges of our hillsides and the tree line you can see from down below. I feel like there should be a section here that actually defines tree canopy a little bit more than what I've seen. I'd like to see us discuss, or at least bring up, that the tree canopy does refer to, you know, our lovely green hillside, and not just seeing houses lined up, you know, every single edge of every single street across the city. In particular, for example, a house was approved on Ridgewood Drive that now creates this gigantic house that sticks out where there never was one before. I'd hate to see that happen to the entire skyline of our city that has such a beautiful tree line and a beautiful canopy. I would like to see us at least mention what we mean by canopy somewhere, more than what I've seen. In LU 3-3, land use 3.3, residential design review, we use the word large and second story. Does this not apply also to third story additions and things like that? Why are we putting the word second story only in here? That is a question I'd like some clarification. And what does large mean? The non-qualified word that just basically can implicate a lot of things.
Yeah, I think we refer to second stories in the sense that, given the height limits in Millbrae, most homes, given the height limit of 30 feet, would be 2 stories. And now it is possible that a house could have 3 stories, although those ceiling heights would have to be much lower.
We have 4 stories in Millbrae.
We do, yeah, and there are some instances where 4-story homes are allowed, and yeah, I don't know the heights of those homes, but this is kind of just in reference to the height limits here.
And should we just say 2 stories or greater? I mean, at least put it in it.
We could make that clarification.
And just large doesn't really, I don't know what large means. I mean, is there a size limit for a second story? I thought anytime we see a second story, it comes in front of a review.
Yeah, and large is a subjective term. I mean, through the design review process, you can define what the large is, whether that house looks visually large. You could have a house that's under the floor area ratio, but that looks visually large. But
This says large second story addition.
right,
Is there ever a second story addition that doesn't come to the planning review?
there's a second story additions that don't go to the planning commission but go through design review and staff review.
Parking. We were very good about actually identifying parking as an issue and the risk mitigation between our new developments and our residential neighborhoods nearby. But we never really directly say that the intent is to keep the effect of high-density housing that is supposed to be carless or reduced in automotive use from impacting the local neighborhoods. I'd like to see that specifically added somewhere in the language that we are in the intent is to reduce that conflict. And to point out that the high-density housing's intent is also to have carless or reduced car usage.
You're referring to a specific policy.
I'm looking at LU 5.3
Okay.
is where I started off, but I find this across, you know, pretty much the entire plan, that we never really nail that down, that there is an intent and a purpose. And that also rolls over to LU 6.4 for the same comment. The image on figure 2.3 within the attachment 3, we still have Recreation Center opening in summer 2022. It is open. We should probably just delete that. LU 9.4 is where the tree in the skyline comes back in. But on LU 10-1, public infrastructure, maintaining public infrastructure and safe. You know, there's a lot in here about fire safety, and we talk a lot about the high danger zones. And we don't have those in Millbrae. Currently, you know, only along Crystal Springs, there's one little section up there. But we really don't go into the depth about our Spur Trail, Lomita Trail fire risk. We don't cover any of the fire risk along the Telescope Hill, along the canyons between Hillcrest and Millbrae Avenue. And there's just nothing in here at all that talks about how we're evaluating them, reducing that risk. Even though, you know, I live and my residents in my community live right next to the Spur Trail, there's no fire access. It's not safe right now. We know that's not safe, but there's nothing in here about how we're actually measuring the safety of that and trying to generate solutions for it. We basically just say, okay, there's a fire risk, it's over there, it's not us. And I'm unsatisfied with that safety in this document. I've said this time and time again, this is actually going to be a big one for me. We keep using the term parking protected bike lanes. That is an oxymoron. It does not exist. Parking does not protect bike lanes. It endangers cyclists. You may use the proper terms of, in my opinion, protected bike lanes, or you can use isolated bike lanes, or you could say that these are class 4 bike lanes. But as soon as you put parked cars between the lane of travel and cyclists, you're endangering them, not protecting them at every intersection. I'm fine to use the concept. The city's stuck going forward with this in the ATP plan, which I asked that they wouldn't, me being on the actual BPAC that started Millbrae's BPAC. I've been against this the whole time, and it's still incorporated here, so I'm a little frustrated at that. But that being said, we are where we are. Just don't use the term parking protected, or parking protected for bike lanes. They're not. Somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's going to get killed at one of these intersections. I know that's probably a unpalatable outcome, but let's at least not term them parking protected. Street cleanliness. In ED 5.5, we talked about the downtown street cleanliness. This is wonderful that we're working on street cleanliness. But this document seems to put all of the weight of keeping the street clean on the city, not on the local businesses. And we've had a large problem downtown as far as sidewalk cleanliness outside of our businesses, and yet we do not put any of the burden or talk about their responsibility for maintaining the cleanliness in front of their storefronts. Is there a reason for that, Roscoe, that we haven't included that language?
We do have a community preservation ordinance, which does exactly that. When a new business goes into downtown, we have a zoning clearance process in which we take a look at the frontage of that business and work with the new business and cleaning that up. A lot of the times, litter and things like that aren't outside of the scope of the general plan document, and that's the reason.
I just think that in ED 5.5, we talk about street cleanliness and we put the burden on the city for this, that seems unfair to the city's responsibility. That should be a shared obligation between the city and the property owners. I'd like to see something about, us working with property owners to achieve these goals, not just saying the city's responsible for this.
Sure.
Something that seems to be missing from the document on creek and waterway, I guess we have a little bit of discussion about the impact on local streams and things like that in the EIR report, but I still do not see anything in this document that covers the creek that runs along Millbrae Avenue and the old bridge that's at the back of the park there, that it was at this point fallen down and should be restored at some point. Is there a reason why we just don't even mention the creek and the intent to keep it clean within all the documentation? Maybe somebody who worked on the EIR can talk if that was ever vetted, or point out where it is, because I was not able to find it. Do you know?
What's the specific name of the creek?
It runs right along Millbrae Avenue next to Ashton. It's right at the back of Rotary Park. It's on the old Spur Trail. The Spur Trail used to cross it. There's actually a remnant foundation of a bridge that used to be. And it's pretty dirty and it's pretty disgusting. It needs to be kept clean, and yet I see no effort to discuss its watershed cleanliness. I mentioned this before during a meeting about that creek existing. I'm going to commend people for keeping RAC 1.10 nicely elevated for Spur Trail improvements. I love seeing that. 1998 plan, or actually 1974 plan, had that in there as well. And it's great that it continues to be a priority for the city to keep the Spur Trail development going. And that also comes up maybe in the NRC 1.5, 1.8, and 1.9. I'm just looking for any elements that have to do with the watershed, Millbrae, and that specific creek. And in HSHM 2.6, Local Hazard Mitigation Plan, again, this is where you get to the wildfire risks. I just don't see a mitigation plan for any territory within Millbrae, and we basically leave it out because it doesn't meet the super high standard, but it still endangers our community. I feel like we need to have something in here, whether that be working with the fire department on at least getting a methodology in which they're going to create a plan to deal with these risks. Within the critical facility locations, HSHM 4.3, we do include the hospitals, critical public facilities. Isn't our recreation center going to be a crisis center and the Shea Center a crisis center? Can we be very specific about obviously including the school, at least the Shea Center, and of course our new recreation facility that's zoned appropriately for a disaster? One thing I have noticed in the document when they talk about sites of hazards, environmental hazards, 1401 Millbrae Avenue, I could not find it in the document. Is anybody who worked on the ER know why that was never included? It is an old gas station with underground tanks. It is actually listed on a hazard for the state of California. At least it actually was considered a very bad hazard. I can't remember the name of that list. Yeah, it's an old, I know that was a long-standing, like, high exposure risk place on the state of California's. In '05, I actually looked at it to find out why it wasn't ever fixed and cleaned. It's still there. It still has not had the tanks dug up and cleaned that I know of. It should be on the list of specific sites that are known hazards.
So we did look at the Cortese list, and there's like the database, like you're saying, to look
Yep.
at. And since that didn't come up, my assumption right now, without having that detail, because it wasn't on the list when we reviewed it, that it probably is a closed case, if that makes sense.
They never cleaned the tanks. It's still an empty lot, untouched, unfilled, and they've never dug them up. That hasn't changed. I've been, since that list was made, here, and they've never touched it.
Well, we'll readdress, we can look again at the state list,
Okay.
has a state list of sites, but we didn't see that when we reviewed it, so we can
Go
look
take
at
a
it
the
again.
property. You'll still see the chain link fence wrapped around it, completely untouched, nobody goes in there. And on top of it, as I said, they've never dug up the tanks that, all these years.
I don't know if the city
Yeah.
staff have anything to add on that. Also, if you want to go back to your question about the creek.
Yes. Is it in the document? Because I could not find it anywhere.
So on page 3.329, sorry, on page 3.329, the biological, agricultural, forestry resources section. I'll let you all scroll there while I scroll there as well. The top of that page. So that impact discussion, so all the impact discussions in the IR talk about the proposed general plan and specific plan policies that were also reviewed to see if how much was the self-mitigating aspects of the plans. And one of the policies, sorry, an implementation program A, as an apple, it's called Creek Daylighting and Restoration Study. It was in the NRC element. That's the Natural Resources and Conservation element, right? So that implementation program A, Creek Daylighting and Restoration Study, it says the city shall prepare a creek daylighting and restoration study that will identify specific actions to maintain and restore creeks and streams to a more natural state. Based on findings from the study, the city shall then prepare and submit recommendations to city council on priority actions to maintain and restore creeks and streams.
This is
So again, this is an implementation program within the general plan element. So basically being a programmatic document and no specific project being proposed related to that creek per se that could directly impact it that we know at this time, this implementation program at a programmatic level will have you do a study about the creeks and restoring them at a general overall sense.
So then my next question is there an inventory of creeks within any of the documentation? Because I don't see, that as being
I don't believe so, but no, I'm looking at the general plan planners
maybe a
and they
little bit
said
of a
no.
gap then if, we don't know what we're even going to be looking at.
Well, I think
We have a policy.
I'm not the land use planner here who prepared the general plan, but I would think that that's what the policy is actually asking to be done. The implementation program is asking to be done, to prepare a study to determine that, the specific actions. And I would think that you would do an inventory of the status of the creeks to then figure out what to do in terms of restoring the creeks. I think that's what the two parts of the study.
We have to do inventory to find out how many creeks we have, then an inventory about the status of the creek, or at least an evaluation of the status of them, and then we do the implementation of a plan or project.
I believe so, but I'm gonna let Jim add something here.
I would assume that if there's a study of creeks in the city, the initial step in it would be to identify all the creeks that you're going to study. So,
Okay.
yeah, even though there isn't a formal inventory here, the program says we need to take a look at all our creeks and determine how to proceed with restoration and preservation.
Okay, so we'll push that down the road, I guess, a little bit here. And we do parks inventory, we do open space inventory. It would be nice to have a creek inventory, but I'll take that's, the process to come is.
The background report that was prepared quite a while ago did describe all of the environmental resources within the city. I don't know if it did a specific creek by creek inventory of all the watersheds in the city. There is some discussion of this. I just don't know what level. I'd have to go back and review the background report.
Appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, 1401? Oh, good.
Good evening. My name is Leslie. I assisted with the AIR, and I did a quick search of the GeoTracker State Water Resources Control Board database, and the reason it is not included in the EIR is because it was completed. It was deemed case closed as of 2016. So anything that happens beyond that, there are some post-closure site management requirements. Those are mostly notifications prior to change in land use, prior to development, and prior to subsurface work.
Okay, so then it sounds like the city may have some role in trying to reopen that property and get it back onto at least development or changed from an empty, ugly lot. I mean, it's the first thing you see when you come into Millbrae off the 280 is a chain link fence wrapped around a lot. It's quite disturbing, actually, that is our entrance piece of property. If it is truly cleaned, which I'm surprised because, as I said, when I looked back at the days, they never removed the tanks. Unless they had removed them way before '05 and it was on the list for a long period of time. Maybe that's possible, but something needs to happen as far as that property being, I guess, at least reactivated again, if that's the case. All right, that's it for attachment 3.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, kind of following on with Commissioner Wong's comment. So, when we received the packet today, I was I had this impression that the public comment period for the general plan might be closed because there's this comment matrix with responses from the city. So I'm wondering, but it doesn't seem like there was any actual deadline for comment collection announced. And so, if someone were to send in an email commenting on the general plan after tonight, but before the approval on the 15th, would that packet be updated with that person's comment summarized and responded to?
Yeah, the comment matrix was prepared as part of the packet, and we make every effort to include all the comments and address it. Comments that may have been made after the packet was prepared and distributed. We will, for the next step, the planning commission will include that in the matrix. But to answer your question, public comments. We're accepting comments all the way up until the adoption of the plan. So that includes tonight and after the night before the city council and at the city council meeting.
Okay, great. Chair, I actually have some questions that I think I might be more clarifying than substantive at this point. Okay, so in the EIR, actually that's more of a comment thing. So in the infrastructure part where it talks about water supply and water demand, a lot of the ability of the city to meet its projected demand seems to depend on this waving away of the Bay Delta plan being adopted, because otherwise it looks like there's a very big gap that would have to be. So here I know exactly which page this is. It's page 31326 and the previous page. So yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at that number and it does seem big. And and like I said, it's just kind of waved away. There's no mitigation measure mentioned, no discussion of like, well, if the city were to implement some kind of some sort of water conservation measures, we could still meet the demand. We could still meet reduced demand through the reduced supply. So yeah, I just, I just want some clarity on like how important this gap is and why it was kind of waved away. I mean, one other thing is that, this water demand forecast is also, it grows quite a lot. And I was trying to piece together where this water demand forecast came from, because at least in the EIR, it's just these two tables. It's kind of spread, I didn't have the time to tie the infrastructure report in the specific plan to these numbers. So maybe if I had a spreadsheet and a couple of hours, I could do it. But yeah, I just want to make sure that we're set up for success here to meet the needs of the city.
I believe the bulk of the water demand assumptions are based on the most current urban water management plan that the city prepared. That's the starting point. And then the infrastructure master plan looked at the potential change in demand as a result of the increased residential and development capacity under the specific plan, and made an assessment that there was adequate supply to meet that new change demand. So there's a combination of starting with the urban water management plan that identified supply and demand and capacity, and the refinements based on the infrastructure master plan.
So yeah, it was based on the Millbrae Urban Water Management Plan, adherence to the general plan and specific plan policies that were drafted to address water supply, and also your own Millbrae Climate Action Plan measures 20 and 21, which include rebates for efficient appliances, fixtures, and basically implementing your water efficiency measures. So addressing the dealing with the urban water management plan for Millbrae, saying it projects it can cover the water demands over these years, plus that net change that Jim was speaking to, plus compliance with your climate action plan measures about water efficiency.
Okay, so so what's going on with table 313.5 then?
So the single dry air supply and demand comparison, that is from the urban, if you look at the source of the table, it's from the Millbrae Urban Water Management Plan. So that was to demonstrate in table format, just for ease of understanding the numbers, what the total supply and demand are per what the Urban Water Management Plan says. And then we went on to explain that the Urban Water Management Plan projects that it can cover, that Millbrae is covered with water supply by the SFPUC over the next, basically the horizon of this general plan.
I mean, the first part of that sentence says if the Bay Delta plan is not implemented, though, right? That's an open question, right? Whether the Bay Delta plan will be implemented.
Yes, but right now the assumption is that it is, because it's like these plans, it's a plan that's adopted and in place.
Okay.
I can keep going, yes. There was a comment, I'm just moving on to the next attachment 8. I'm actually ready to go through some 8, 9, 10, and into the zoning section here a little bit, Nestor. I'm sure you'll be excited for that. There was a comment from Christine Reed and Ken Giacotto about the fire access roads, comments regarding water supply, adequacy of fire stations in new developed area, fire access roads. Comments and the responses, comments are noted and addressed in specific plan where applicable. Could you tell me where those comments are? That might be a little bit of a goose chase, I know, but we might want to come back to it if you can find them all.
We'll look into it and then, and
Okay, I'll come back to that when you're ready.
put a note.
Well, first of all, I'm going to jump over to attachment 10. I have a question about our map, our zoning map. Is the pool on the top of Helen not on our map? It's behind those houses along Helen Drive at the very top. There's the entrance to the water, and it doesn't look like there's a piece of property on our maps that's zoned. It's listed in a green, would that be the open space? But that's a developed piece of property with a pool on it. It's not open space.
But that open space designation, you're referring to the zoning map, right?
I look at, attachment 10, the zoning map. Is there a piece of property that's not on our map? And we've seen this before in the past, where a piece of property wasn't zoned properly. I just, knowing that it's there and it's not far from where I live, and what if our map is actually missing a piece of property?
Okay.
And that would be an unfortunate thing to move forward with Right where it dead ends and goes over to Junipero Serra Park there, behind the back of that yellow road, there's a piece of property back there at the driveway that leads to the pool.
And then it's currently zoned under our map as
Open
open
space.
space. You're saying that it should be,
Well, is it really open space? It's a developed piece of property with a pool and houses and or like building structures and bathrooms and.
right, and so this zoning map is indicating what the current, the proposed future use is.
Mhm.
So,
Are we,
future uses that it would be considered as an open space.
okay,
type of
so
property.
that would be a change to existing. Shouldn't that be captured in the table that we have that talks about zoning changes?
If, we'll take a look at the existing, if it is changed in the existing map and changed it, then that should have been included in the
The
table.
list.
Yeah.
All right, so either we didn't intend it to change, we're changing it. I'd like some clarity, are we really saying that piece of property is going to go to open space?
Yes.
Okay. Those property owners are aware of it?
Well, we can make that, the change, to the appropriate zoning designation, as, after, before moving it.
Yeah, before moving to finalization, make sure at least to get, the council has the decision that they know what direction it's going to go.
Right, we can make that in the.
Let's raise that one up because it is a piece of property that obviously has ownership. And
Yeah, understood.
Can you
I
also, sorry, can you also double check it's actually inside the Millbrae City boundary? That line is really tight. I mean,
it backs up. Yeah.
I grew up in the Meadows, I know it too. I mean, go to the top of Helen, it
You
could be on the other
make
side of
that
that
little turn,
line. It might not be our property. I don't know. Let me just double check that too, please.
I agree. It's worth looking, but
Okay.
and it's possible, property, we had the same thing with on Larkspur, the one house that had a zoning issue with some property. Let's get into a little bit, Nestor, on the definitions within our attachment 9. I always wonder, having come onto this commission, a definition somewhere to determine what is a principal room of residence. I would think that is something that'd be critical to define in here because it actually regulates what we can look at and determine. Can we not have a section that determines, it actually states out a definition of that for the city? I do see online that it could indicate a bedroom, and I know that I've heard from people that it only indicates rooms of like living rooms and major rooms that are shared across the house. I just like a definition of what a principal room of residence is.
Yeah, and the zoning code amendments were intended just to implement this specific plan zoning. We didn't go through and comprehensively do an overhaul of the zoning code. We will do that at some point in the future. There's sort of a lot of other things that that we need to clean up in the zoning code, and that is one of them.
I struggle to find it in our zoning code now, is I guess one of my issues. Maybe that's another agenda item on a different day.
Yeah, and there's that, and there's a few other instances of just other parts of the code that need to be cleaned up and clarified, and we will do that as part of a comprehensive zoning code update. These updates were just to implement this specific plan.
Okay. We do talk about smoke shops, though. I'd like to clarification. Where does a marijuana dispensary fit? Is it medical or a smoke shop, and how are we regulating it? Because I don't see anything about dispensaries in here, and it is a hot topic in the Bay Area. I would think we'd have to cover that right now rather than let it pass by.
Well, we will, there's several laws that regulate marijuana dispensaries, and we'll be, regardless of what's not indicated in the zoning code, we will be applying any state laws that regulate that.
But we're not actually creating any rules on where that classifies within our documentation.
Not at this point.
All right. I think that might create some contention in the long term, at least some flexibility that might have some impact for development, especially in this time frame that we're looking at. Somewhere there was a table that talked, or I guess the beginning of the tables that designate whether something's permitted or conditional, and it has a P or a C or a PP in there. Yet we don't have any, it took me a while to figure out what does PP even mean, I don't know. I'm looking at just, our municipal zoning code, the chapter 10.5. We get into the table sets, and I don't see a key anywhere that identifies what P, C. At the very beginning it says,
Yeah, there is,
permitted, conditional, or accessory using allowed within.
right, the P is permitted, and then C is conditional.
What's PP?
Permitted, should be permitted,
We just put a key, I guess, is what I'm asking, at least in the title of that.
yes.
Put a C next to P, or P next to permitted C, and define what PP means. But it looks like PP sits almost exclusively in the accessory uses.
I will take a look at that.
It said scientist, I'm trying to decipher codes and things, and I can't figure out what I'm even looking at here.
So P, 1P indicates permitted by right, and then 2 is permitted by another permit.
Okay. So it's permitted by permit instead of by Oh, okay, I gotcha. Yeah, right, by right, yeah. Okay, so let's just put something in there that we could.
Yeah, I think it actually is there. It didn't translate once we put it into a Word file.
Okay.
So we can add it to the.
Just put a key in there, so anybody looking at the document in the future will know. All right. I said attachment 11, I guess if we're going to do, if that property does fall and we're changing zone, obviously it needs to be in there. And that's it for that section for me.
Thank you so much. Any other questions we want to ask now? No? Then let's open up the public comment. I've got one speaker slip, Mitchell, can't read it, Vinciguerra? There you go.
Good evening. My name is Mitchell Vinciguerra, and I'm a representative for Carpenters Local 217 here in San Mateo County. I'm here tonight to speak on the town's general plan and some things I'd like to bring to your consideration. Labor standards is something that should be included in any general plan. We want to make sure that developers in our area are paying area standard wages, so the skilled men and women who build these projects can afford to live in our local communities. Local hire also helps ensure money generated by new development stays in our community in the form of sales tax and property tax revenue. Providing health care is another necessity. 1 out of 4, or 26% of construction workers in California lack health insurance. That's 2.5 times the rate for all California workers. These workers are sometimes reliant on emergency rooms, taxing an already overburdened medical system in our community. Another great labor standard would be the use of apprentices. Construction apprenticeship programs are a proven escalator to the middle class, training the next generation of California construction workforce every year at no cost to taxpayers. Policies that require the utilization of apprentices develop a pool of skilled labor in our local area to work on future projects. Tonight I ask you to consider labor standards before recommending to City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have?
Yes, we have one raised hand. Anthony Montes.
Hello there, can you hear me just fine?
Yes. Yes, Anthony, go ahead.
Okay. Brilliant. Hi there, my name is Anthony Montes. I'm a community organizer. My name is Anthony Montes. I'm a community organizer with the Silicon Community Safer and More Just through making bicycling safe and accessible for all. And we wanted to provide a public comment specifically on the El Camino Real downtown specific portion of this this resolution, this plan. We really appreciate Harnish for working with the city to develop this excellent recommendation specific plan. Prioritizing complete streets, place setting, greenscaping, bus islands, and protected bike lanes along El Camino Real are some of the proposed improvements that would significantly improve safety and comfort for those that walk and bike and use public transportation. El Camino Real has governments, and many members of the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition have prioritized their advocacy efforts on improving bicycle facilities on El Camino Real from Daly City to San Jose. We support the commission passing a resolution recommending the council amend the plans, but would like to emphasize that a class 4 protected bike lane would provide better protections for those that bike on El Camino Real. In addition, protected bike lanes, vehicle speeds along the corridor. One of the concerns I had with the plan was insinuating that because there's commercial, commercial businesses there, that it would be better to have a class 2 buffered bike lane. We think that a class 4 protected bike lane with parking removed would create more safe corridor, and it would actually improve. So we hope the city and the council keep this in mind as they implement
Anthony, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, you just cut out, so I stopped your time. I'll restart it. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, yeah. Essentially, we would like to see those protected bike lanes, those Class 4 protected bike lanes along El Camino. We think that it would still be good for the commercial properties and the businesses that are there. There should be no, reduction in traffic and in foot traffic, rather, patronage. And it would still, be acceptable for business and for people who are walking and biking. So that's basically my main piece here. Thank you so much.
Is there anybody else that viewing online that would like to? I don't see any other hands. Anybody else have any comments? Raise your hand, please. No? Alrighty then. Guess that's it for public comment. Can I have a motion?
I'll second it.
Can we vote? Go ahead, yeah. Alrighty. Public comments closed. Who wants to start off the discussion?
Well, I would actually like to, just because of Anthony's comment there. I heard what he said. I understood it. He's going towards Class 4 is great. Protected bike lanes are fantastic. Protected bike lanes behind a row of cars are not. And he even said, with the cars removed. So I want to reiterate that, I'm actually in alignment with what he's saying there. It is great to have protected bike lanes, but you have to be able to see the bicyclists from the lane of traffic. And if you don't, you're endangering them. If we move forward with a protected bike lane, we do, but there's going to have to be something else. We're accepting some danger here that's pretty big for those cyclists at every intersection. And so I just want to make sure you understand my perspective on that. We move forward, just take the word bike parking protected. It doesn't exist. It's an oxymoron. It creates a false illusion of what's going on here. I also have a couple more comments on a document. I actually had some questions about the Bio 1, Bio 2, the bird raptors and the bat. What projects do those apply to? Does every development have to have this survey? A house building a second story? Where does this apply? Large projects? Go ahead.
Regarding mitigation measures Bio 1 and Bio 2, these are for projects that would disturb trees, specifically the removal or alteration of trees and structures that may serve as roosting habitat for either bats or birds. And also for birds, this is specifically during the bird nesting season of February 1st through September 15th.
Okay. In an environment where we're worried about the people building and adding stock inventory, and we're creating very, how expensive is it to do one of these surveys? Because, private homeowners are pretty taxed on trying to get a project off the ground, and you're adding on now new burdens. They're pretty significant, at least is what it sounds like, for all these surveys, whether it be the cultural surveys, the paleontological surveys. You're really adding on a lot of cost burden. What does a survey like this cost the homeowner?
Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you on cost, but we did build into the biological and cultural resources mitigation measures with your city staff that actually it was at the discretion of the city.
Okay.
So these mitigation measures, because of that exact concern on individual, like a small home extension or whatnot, if city staff in the conversation about an planning application said, we reviewed it at the staff level, it's not necessary. So it remains with you at the city to determine if some of those are necessary for the much smaller like house extension, house addition type project.
There's a discretionary aspect to the city's decision on whether we're going to require it. Okay. That's good. Okay.
Yeah, we had that discussion, yeah.
Okay, good. I'm just concerned about that cost. There was a statement earlier about within the downtown and the ECR about not all first floors having commercial space and the possibility we'd have open, empty businesses. Was that something I heard correctly? We're worried about all buildings, if we were to require that, would be at risk?
I can answer this. I don't know if Jim Stickley is
Yeah, I think
able
he's
to
the one who
respond.
said it, yeah. So.
Yeah. So I think what he was referring to is the risk of overflooding ground floors with retail. If we require all of the ground floor within the project area to have retail use, then we may end up with vacancies if there is not enough demand for retail space. So we want to make that requirement only where it makes the most sense, which is around in the downtown along Broadway and on the frontage streets along El Camino Real.
I don't understand how economically that works out. If you increase the supply, they're going to be less costly because people are going to have to drop their prices to fill them. Eventually, there's a balance of supply and demand.
So all of the ground floors, the land use designation within the project area is all mixed use, which means that the ground floors can have non-resident, or, any kind of commercial use. So if a developer wants to include commercial use or retail use, they can. We are just not making it a requirement. We are not making it mandatory. So in the downtown mixed use land use designation, all ground floors are required to be retail.
Retail.
To be retail. In other places, the retail is allowed, but it is not required.
And do we allow for residential to be on the first floor of these large complexes?
Yes.
See, I'm worried about that. I don't believe in the supply-demand balance leading to an empty space here. I mean, you're just going to have cheaper spaces. In many ways, the housing is subsidizing the commercial space and the retail space. That doesn't make sense to me.
No, but I guess I'll just reiterate that they are allowed to have retail or commercial space, but they are not required. And the ground floor can also have other active uses, and we have actually listed what the active ground floor uses can be, which are non-retail. So they could be small office spaces, they could be community serving uses, they could be galleries, they could be maker spaces, so there's a pretty wide range.
That's not residential. And I'm asking, do we allow for residential? And I'm thinking that we should be excluding residential. It could be anything but residential on the first floor. I mean, we want to keep it. I mean, I'm looking longer term than just immediate housing needs. Look, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, when these housings are packed, there's going to be more need for commercial space and retail and access to other things. It's going to provide the city benefit and those properties benefit and the community benefit. I just don't understand why we'd be accepting of retail on the first floor. I'm sorry, of residential on the first floor.
Well, I mean, I think if there are smaller, a lot of that is also going to be determined by the market demand, right? So, and we don't have our economist here, but at the time that a developer comes to redevelop, is interested in redeveloping property and there is demand for commercial or retail, then we are allowing that to happen. What I'm hearing from you is that you are saying that there should be a requirement for no residential on the first floor. Is that what you're
That's actually what I believe is probably
recommending?
Yeah, I would think is in the city's best interest is to use the housing to subsidize the building of commercial space, even if it's at a low cost. I mean, eventually businesses will move in and the supply demand will balance itself. It's just going to be cheaper places to start a business. Or they do activate them, as you said, into other things like maker spaces and facilities for developments.
Yeah,
There's other uses. It's just not residential.
We'll make a note of that comment.
Maybe I could, jump in for a clarification here. I think what the main intent here is we don't want to see a situation like, for example, we had at South Beach in San Francisco where retail was required in all ground floor spaces and it completely flooded the market. The market just couldn't support that much retail activity. And we're still seeing that in a number of cities where, the intent was to have activating retail at the ground floor. That was required in, many of these frontages, and then the retail market itself just couldn't support all that retail, so it led to vacant spaces. So we don't want to have vacant spaces. So that was a primary concern. And then, excuse me for a second. And then with regard to residential, I think there is, particularly in that northern part of El Camino Real, I think there is a desire to allow what we're calling ground floor retail, but it would actually be residential stoops. So the ideal configuration for residential along that northern part of El Camino Real would be to have residential entries, stoops. Lobbies would obviously not have a stoop. They would come down to the ground floor. But to activate that area in a largely residential environment, but with residential facing the street. And we think there's actually a place for that. There's just sort of this residential district feel there. And then there's the very active Main Street when you get further south, on the frontage roads and obviously on Broadway. So we actually see a positive in allowing for residential along those frontages as, a good sort of walkable land use for that segment.
Is that the only place within that, within the plan that allows for that first floor residential? Is that section?
No, it's actually all of the sections are flexible in terms of allowing, as Poonam says, in terms of allowing commercial or residential. But we're sort of encouraging a residential emphasis in that northern section, whereas in the southern section, we're encouraging more, more commercial emphasis, office and whatnot. But then the retail emphasis would be just the frontage roads and Broadway. So it would really be focusing the retail where it really counts.
So I would concur with Commissioner Del Negro that some areas closer to the downtown core that have been identified, the underutilized parking lots south of Meadow Glen and adjacent to the Civic Center, they're currently marked residential focused mixed use. But I would encourage that to also be highlighted as commercial preference area and commercial preference mixed use. That's our opportunity to have a vibrant downtown core. If we have primary residential there, then it would change the complexity of the complex or the character of that downtown core, and it'd be like walking into someone's backyard or into their house. And it might discourage people from coming to the center and heart of our Millbrae community and making it welcome and open for them there. So I'd suggest expanding that commercial preference area south of Meadow Glen, at least there, and to the area adjacent to Civic Center. There's other areas that I see also when we're talking about the zoning map that ideally I see that there would be some transition from the commercial areas to the single-family residences, like higher density mixed use. There's some areas within the map, just like east of El Camino, Hemlock neighborhood, for example, where the end of Hemlock is bordered by, zoning from TOD, which is 100 plus feet, and then El Camino downtown plan, which is up to 60 feet. So you've got this single-family designation right next to these heights, which are 60 to 100 feet on each side. So some of these areas within the zoning map, I see that we may want to consider rezoning to allow higher density. This area bounded along Hemlock, I know that there's single-family residences there, but it's bordered by the tracks also in El Camino. And eventually, I'm not sure if that condition would be beneficial, but allowing them to transition into higher density mixed-use area along in that area would make sense. Also, the TOD area, heading into the west of El Camino up to Magnolia. I could see that being TOD designation, expanding that. That area is bordered just to the north of Millbrae Avenue. That area is bordered by, the senior center and higher density mixed use. So that area that's marked residential focused mixed use and corridor mixed use could actually, I believe, be higher because it's bounded and buffering the residences and is surrounded by other high density mixed use, can go even higher there. So there's these pockets, and then also the area on the north end of El Camino, one block in at, I guess I would make a Broadway. There's a lot of the R1 single family houses, and that's bordered by Cappuccino, but eventually I could see that transitioning to higher density mixed use. So some of these areas, like, we encourage calming and transition, but some of these areas in the zone seem they need to be buffered a little bit more or have more transition into single-family residences. And if that's not happening, like in some of these areas, I think the neighbors will be very concerned, and I think it behooves them that we allow them to also increase the zoning for higher density in those areas too. So I concur with Commissioner Del Negro on some of these zoning issues, some of the maps, minor tweaks which just be made or considered.
Anybody else?
I actually have a thank you for CP13. I thought this was a fantastic element to really focus in on, having the bike routes that were off of El Camino still for less, risky travel of children or families that want to get to and from. I really want to say that this is unappreciated for the community equity part of it. The Bayside Manor community, our Landing Lane residents, they don't have access easily down to the BART station without using El Camino Real. Making sure that we have a route along Hemlock is to their advantage. Calling this out in this document was really good, but I would like it to also be tagged onto our community equity part, talking about how this is helping that community have access when they didn't before.
Talking on that equity subject, I do see a lot of improvements that could be made to the east of El Camino neighborhoods. For example, egress, there's only one egress. Those areas are prone to flooding. Access can be improved. I know that there's roads leading to the BART station, but those are blocked off and bulleted off. There could be connectivity so that the neighborhoods join and then have more than one egress. Flooding is a big issue if we aren't able to address flooding issues and overcapacity. I think that, the big issue with climate issues, there's expected to be higher swings in weather patterns, which cause for bigger stormwater events, which could contribute to even more flooding events in this area. If the infrastructure can't handle that, there should be plans for egress, emergency routes, connectivity. Like I mentioned, each one of those neighborhoods only has one way in and out. Also, I don't agree with the noise studies and the wind studies and the lighting studies that occur where baseline is way too advanced, that we deal a lot with the airport noise across the entire city and lighting from the airport, as I mentioned, that we should try to reduce that baseline, have wind studies, calming studies, light studies that will feed into planting plans and development of our city, especially on the east of El Camino. I think it's even though there's no social justice issues within our neighborhoods here and so forth, there are inequities. That area is bounded by the freeway, airport land, so they get the brunt of it. They're bounded by the railroad tracks. So I don't agree that there couldn't be more done for sound barriers, either vegetative barriers or sound walls from the freeway and the airport, along with the flooding mitigation, along with development of the lands and requiring the zoning in those areas just west of the airport to not remain undeveloped lands, but they should be managed. And so there should be zoning to have teeth to force the airport to manage them better and not just create a big giant floodplain that's going to continue to flood the entire neighborhood periodically also. I have a lot more comments on these. I wrote them down. I submitted them to staff. So to make it simple, I won't go through the entire comments, but I'll just, as we go through this discussion, as we raise topics, I'll mention some of these issues that I have also.
Thank you. Nathan, do you have something to say? Your hand's up over here.
I do. So I was I had a question about the height map. Oh, I have it open here, right here, page 71. So some of these, it's sort of in line with what Commissioner Wong was mentioning. Some of these, some of the changes in height here don't really make sense to me. So, for example, south of Victoria, so where it's, there is a large mixed-use development there already, but it's a lot of, it is sort of R2 or R3 zoning today. The height limit is 65 feet. But then further down on Broadway, it drops down to 55, even though, I would, that's where the commercial heart of the city is. So if we're hoping to, if it feels to me like the height should in the middle could be higher if it's already 65 feet in a more residential neighborhood. Likewise, Broadway is still pretty wide north of Meadow Glen. So I'm also not sure why the height has to drop from 65 feet down to 55 feet there, when arguably Broadway is, it's just as wide as in the widest part of Broadway starts just north of, it starts just north of Taylor, right? It widens out to a big median, and that median persists all the way down to, I can't remember right now where it ends, but it goes for a while. So if the height limits are set according to the width of the street, it feels like there's a missed opportunity there. And then also, in terms of the residential focused mixed use portions north of Meadow Glen, I mean, there's pretty large mixed use and hotels there. So again, it feels like, those areas are already fairly high levels of development today. So I'm not sure why it feels like, I think I said this in a public comment before in a study session, that I'm not sure why corridor mixed use doesn't go all the way down. But again, I think that's something that could be explored. And then on some other comments that I had, 100% agree with Commissioner Del Negro as well as the commenter from SVBC. We have a letter from Caltrans of all people saying do the Class 4 bike lane. Like they're the people who the city always cities up and down El Camino was like, Caltrans, it's all like they're gonna block this, blah blah blah, and they're saying we need to go for Class 4. So I'm in agreement. We should go for Class 4 bike lanes. I understand wholeheartedly what Commissioner Del Negro is saying about parking protected bike lanes being more of a danger and a safety issue. If we do have to take away the parking, we should definitely study what the impact of that will be. Most parking studies that I've seen conclude that there's an abundance of parking within a certain walkable distance of one's destination. So hopefully we can allay the concerns of the folks along that area who, if we decide to just do away with the parking on El Camino up there, that they'll be their concerns will be allayed. I was really happy to see a lot of attention to sea level rise in one of the appendices of the specific plan. I think it was Appendix B. And I'm really hopeful that we see some programs and plans come before the council or the planning commission to address sea level rise. There was a program in there specifically mentioning a flood zone overlay. I have no idea when this might be coming forward, but the sooner we get on that, the better. Likewise, also, if there are actual plans to build if there are actual conceptual plans to do seawalls or levees along Bayshore Park, again, sooner rather than later, because the sooner we get on it, the less expensive it'll be, the less of an impact. With respect to the flooding that Commissioner Wong mentioned, I was a little concerned to see that in one of the comment letters that the airport provided. So I've heard city officials often point their finger at the airport, saying the airport's not doing its part to fix the pumps that would convey the floodwaters out of landing lane and elsewhere. And in this letter, the airport is pointing their finger right back at us, saying your stormwater system is under capacity. You need to fix that. It's not our fault. I'd like to see some progress here. I'm sure that whether we have the appropriate capacity is buried in Appendix B somewhere. There's a lot of tables, a lot of maps, and it was way too technical and wordy for me to get through in a weekend to determine whether what the airport is saying is true or not. But it would be nice to get some clarity on that. Agree with Commissioner Wong about the need for better access issues for the neighborhoods in Millbrae that are east of Marina Vista and Bayside Manor. We have some very general language in M1.4 and M1.23 discussing that. It might be nice to assure those communities with very known access issues that we'll plan to address this sometime in the next 20 years, which is the time horizon of this general plan. There was a policy in the specific plan, CP9, talking about working with Samtrans on bus stops. If we want people to ride transit, we need to give them a more enjoyable experience waiting for the bus. I live pretty close to the station, and there are 3 ECR bus stops there. They're uncovered. There's no sign indicating when the next bus is going to come. At a bare minimum, we should have covered bus stops so people can shelter from the rain and also take shelter from the sun. The heat waves like the one we had a month ago are just going to keep happening more and more. Already talked about that. Oh yeah, something that I think would be nice to see. So in LU 1.2, it mentions the wanting to make sure that lower and middle income housing is accessible near the accessible in the downtown El Camino areas. I think the city could be thinking more creatively about how to make all neighborhoods in the city more accessible to people of lower and moderate income. There's some really creative solutions being pioneered in cities like Cambridge and Berkeley, considering citywide affordable housing overlays. And our own city is trying to do that with the SB9 ordinance, which I'm not totally convinced will work, but we can, it's a strategy. But yeah, on the whole, I have to say, I really like this plan. A lot of it, all these comments are kind of just trying to make a good plan even better. Yeah, thanks so much for putting this together, and especially Nestor and Roscoe met with me for quite a few hours today to address everything questions that I had for them. So thank you.
Thank you.
I found a section that's missing some text. It's looks like maybe it's just an error in writing. It's in attachment 13. It is on page 1-16, residential land uses. It's a large statement with a colon and nothing to follow. Specific plan would provide the framework for development of up to 1,880 net new multifamily and accessory dwelling residential units with the following composition, colon, nothing. Did we delete some text by accident? Are we missing some figures or tables or something about the composition breakdown? I'm looking at attachment 13, 2040 general plan plus downtown El Camino specific plan facts, findings of facts, statements, overriding considerations. There's a missing section in there. I'm just not sure. Maybe some text just got deleted. That
What page?
does
What page?
1-16. It just refers to a composition, but the composition's not there. Is that something you guys maybe just add back in, whatever that composition was? Okay, just, I was reading it, trying to figure out, well, am I referring to the commercial land underneath? No, that's not right. Okay.
On that, the attachment 10, the zoning map, there is conflict because it states that there's commercial area that's orange, and then RF, residential focused mixed use, which is also orange. And so it'd be good to change the colors because can't really decipher the difference and distinguish what area is zoned for which. Along with that, another comment about zoning is that there's parking areas currently used in the city, such as in downtown core area, that is between, I believe, adjacent to Magnolia, behind a lot of the downtown shops, and then also the parking areas next to, adjacent to City Hall. So I can't tell if that is now designated as commercial space or residential focused mixed use, because they're both orange designation, or I can't decipher that. But good to clarify that. These parking lots, I think the city needs to do a parking study. I think it mentioned that. Think about putting in parking meters, residential parking permits, collecting in lieu fees from developers if they're not able to meet standard parking goals. I know that we will allow them to have less parking based on density credits, but if they do reduce the parking, then they should they should provide fees, so that goes into our city's parking fund to develop and manage these parking spaces. Parking will be a big issue, and is continuing to be a big issue with all the neighbors. And of course, people are encouraged to get out of their cars, but what happens when we convert to electric vehicles and there's not as much a concern about climate issues due to vehicles, and then also providing all the electricity to power all those vehicles too. It could be more focus and development, or thinking about that, maybe a study in the future is needed. Linkages, as I think Commissioner Negro mentioned, we should identify areas for signage, welcoming entrances to our city off the freeways, keep them clean, keep them bright, develop them, welcome signs, City of Millbrae signs, wayfaring signs, linkages to BART, to downtown, to City Hall. There could be more linkages across the existing areas like corridors by living spaces, and also next to the post office where people always cut through to Magnolia from Broadway. I'd like to keep those linkages and call those out in the maps so that we have good access to all our city services and interact with city staff and City Hall and the library with the downtown. those are some of the other comments that I had on that.
To the chair, I actually had a great one to go along with Alan's statement about connectivity. Something that's missing here is Victoria Crossing. We talked about having intermodal access, promoting the transition of people from the intermodal station to downtown Millbrae. The crossing that's most proximal that is there is Victoria, and it's a one-way street from El Camino Real to Broadway for cars. If you're having pedestrians using that, and you want to promote cyclists, pedestrians to use that, it can be one way for cars, but you're going to have to create a second direction back to the station along that route for pedestrians to go back and forth. That street's got to change if that's the goal that's stated in this document about promoting the interaction between downtown and the station. People aren't going to walk down to Millbrae Avenue to cross. And if they're going to go way back to Hillcrest, that's not really leading you into the very tip of downtown, that's leading to the middle of downtown and keeping you away from the end of downtown. So I guess what I'm saying is we should consider adding in at least a bidirectional aspect to pedestrian and bicycles along Victoria between El Camino Real and Broadway.
I'd like to add another major connectivity issue too is for the Lomita School. I believe it's going to service a lot of these high-density residential developments, including the TOD areas. So I don't see any traffic car route, easy access to get to there. If there was an access through the Bayside neighborhoods and connectivity there, that would provide one. But in any case, we also need bike routes and walking path. That's going to be the longest length of school children walking from any one site probably to their school. A lot of the other schools are very close proximity to the neighborhoods. But these TOD residents and their kids will have to make that long journey over to Lomita School, so they should make it easy for them to access.
I concur for sure. It's a huge issue right now, and with the incoming high-speed rail impact on the project, even the crossing that it's at the end of Hemlock that goes across to Santa Paula Lane may be lost. That community is going to get more and more isolated, and this city needs to plan. There's nothing in here that talks about at least a backup exit or entrance from the Bayside Manor community. They're going to be stuck with one way in, one way out. That is a zoning crisis for safety.
Especially with it flooding constantly.
Yes, I mean, this is, we just had even the fact that we didn't have the opening for Aviador during the last flood was an impact to the Marina Vista community. We need to connect probably the Bayside and the Marina Vista communities with some type of cross road in order to provide safety for those two communities, of having two ins and outs. And that's not captured in the change of the city's zoning plan at all, is this underserved communities' negative impacts that we know are coming. So I'm concurring with both Commissioner Chan and Commissioner Wong about that community's needs not being addressed in this document.
Yeah, and to that comment on Aviador, there is an emergency access on the south portion of Aviador. It is blocked off with bollards, but during emergencies, the fire and police department do have the key to be able to.
And that's great. They have an in and out. They have two ins and outs possibly when they're working, and if they are working, we obviously need to fix a new system for them. But Bayside Manor doesn't have that. They got one in, one out, particularly after they removed the crossing, the pedestrian crossing, that actually is designed for a backup for emergency vehicles. They could pull the cones out on that crossing at the end of Hemlock to be able to get an emergency vehicle across if they have to. That's going to vanish, and we're stuck with one in, one out. We got to create a connection that brings the Bayside and the Marina Vista communities together.
I was thinking that one solution, for example, might be connecting that the hotel parking lot and designating it for residences, and then opening that up only, like residential access only, so that they can drive through that bollard that would be open like just for residents only, so they can drive all the way if it's connected to Lomita School.
I guess, so I would suggest that the benefit to having a connection to Bayside and the Marina Vista is that then there's also an under track route that community would have instead of just two over track routes.
Right. I mean, it's going to be an issue if the school children ride their bike or walk there. It's going to be an issue that, you know, we're going to see these issues coming down the road. It's hard to envision them now, but just thinking through it, yeah, we can envision that there'll be needs in the future there. So any steps we can take to address it or take steps towards that direction and let these people know that they're being taken care of.
That's the end of my questions that I have at this point.
Thank you. Roscoe, can I ask a question?
Yes.
These are all great comments. Are they all supposed to be in the general plan, or would those be addressed somewhere else or with some other?
Yeah, the specific plan and the general plan are just policy documents, general in nature. That doesn't preclude the city from setting certain intersections and added connectivity. Some of those are more specific. We do them frequently throughout course of business. This general plan and the specific plan are it's a document to guide the future growth of the city in terms of land use and heights and densities. It also is a document that will manage that growth. Some of the existing concerns and deficiencies in certain areas of the city, there are implementation measures that would address that, and so those aren't going to be ignored and will be addressed in various different efforts.
Jim's got something.
Chair, I agree with what Roscoe said. Just was thinking about all of these similar issues you've been raising about these neighborhoods east of El Camino. And we may work with Roscoe and Nestor and our team to maybe come up with a program or two that's really focused on addressing the connectivity, safety, all these issues that you've been talking about. Because a lot of it's in our mobility issues, but some are safety issues. And so we may be able to, in response to your concerns and observations, they weren't really formulated this way, but we may, with maybe your permission, put together a program or two programs that could address these issues as future actions that the city might take.
That would be good progress, in my opinion, for sure. And I think it would be very appropriate when it goes in front of council to have that there for them to see.
Okay, great. And while I'm up here, I should have said this when I was making presentation. Roscoe and Nestor have really done a fabulous job on this project, especially with Darcy's departure. They've had a huge workload, and I really appreciate the work they've done. We've really had a really strong, successful working relationship, I think, and I think the outcome of the projects are evidence of that. So I just wanted to compliment your staff. And Christie's been really great too, not so much working on the plan, but all of the other kind of background stuff. So anyway, I just wanted to make that observation.
I appreciate that part. Nestor, can I have another question? There were suggestions that we need to change the heights in the downtown specific plan and El Camino. And can you explain the history of where those numbers came from, how many times they've been reviewed and looked at, and is now the appropriate time to be changing those numbers?
I can respond to that. So during the study sessions, we looked at first, I believe, and WRC can correct me if I'm wrong here, but the heights were initially set at around 65 feet. Kind of out of those discussions and in the study sessions, the city desired to have to go a little bit taller, and which is why we have here heights that are around to 125 in one area and then 85 feet along El Camino. The note or comment on the 55 feet being too low along Broadway, and again, WRT can correct me if I'm wrong here, but the reason that section of the property along Broadway is 55, whereas the east side is 85, is to provide a transition to those single-family properties on the west side of the street. When you have such tall building heights, the that transition, stepping down to the lower heights and lower stories is important, just to reduce the mass and the visual bulk of the buildings. And then that's not to say that just, I took a look at the zoning map and that section. The properties extend from Broadway to El Camino, so it's not one property that's 55 and the other one's 85. It's just that one portion of the property, that back half that fronts Broadway is 55. However, that being said, the way that state laws are designed for allowing multi-family uses is a requirement of the city. Any multifamily unit project greater than 10 units is required to provide affordable housing BMR units. At 15%, that automatically qualifies the developer applicant to provide to avail of concessions or incentives, which oftentimes is an increase in height or setbacks. So these heights, I would say, more often than not, will be exceeded just by virtue of the state laws and density bonus, which allow an applicant to forego height limits to provide for in exchange for the affordable housing they're providing on the site. And we've seen that in several developments. We saw that at the Anton development, which is that height limit is currently 40 feet. They went up to 65, I believe, and then also 959 El Camino, which is also currently 40 feet, and they're at 85 feet with that density bonus.
Thank you. And I am not the bike lane expert, so can you tell me the suggestions that have been made here to changing what we've talked about at El Camino? What ramifications would there be to those? Do we have options, or?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that the bike lane, the class 4 is designed, it's just that the buffer should be not vehicle parking.
Can I ask an incongruent question that directly relates to that? This is what we learned tonight. Is that's the zone that also is going to have mostly residential first floors as an opportunity and the division. So why are we creating parking along El Camino Real for the residential when the concept was this is for businesses, for people coming and going? And this is the place we least need the on-street parking, is in that zone. I mean, a class 4 lane there would be great if it's protected by, a tree line, that sort of nature, but remove the parking. It's not necessary if this is high-density housing designed around TOD and transit-oriented developments with low car usage. We're not serving storefronts.
Yeah, and we requiring ground floor commercial or retail is, the commercial component is important, but certainly we don't want vacant storefronts on the city or around the city. It is not an attractive visual appearance. Residential, is important, and it is something that, through the again, density bonus law allows developers to apply for incentives or concessions to essentially waive development standards that the city requires, but also HCD has identified ground floor commercial as a potential constraint to housing production.
And I'm not arguing about the opportunity here. If we are saying that we're flexible, that's actually totally okay to put residential on first floor, particularly in that area, as we learned from the last conversation. But to the chair's point about, the parking that's there and having a class 4, well, that's the one place where keeping a class 4 but eliminating parking makes most sense. Which, to Anthony's point, the person who spoke from the community, my view of parking endangering, not helping, but also Caltrain's wanting class 4 bike lanes and promoting it. It's great to have a class 4. People feel very comfortable there. But, when we get down further into downtown and you get around the businesses, now we have the frontage road, and now we have the flip over where the parking's on the inside of the curb, which makes sense for the businesses to have cars coming and going. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have parking on El Camino Real for the residential zones as first floor dominant. So I don't buy the argument that we have to keep the parking there, is what I'm saying.
Maybe I could comment Roscoe, if that's okay.
Certainly, yes, thanks.
So I love the suggestion. You know, the progressive urban planner in me would like to get rid of as much parking on the street as possible. So I think we're, you know, one way to look at this is that this is a dynamic situation. I think these, what we're now calling flexible curb lane uses are going to be flexible over time because we're going to have continually changing needs about TNC pickups and drop-offs, deliveries, service vehicles, the need for parklets, and those kinds of things. So I think that impacts the the downtown configuration in one way, you know, putting that flexible use curb lane against the curb and putting the bike with its protective separation on the outside of that. In the northern section, I think we have not gotten a lot of support in completely eliminating parking. You know, for better or for worse, there is still a demand for parking. There is concern about spillover into the adjacent residential neighborhoods. We're actually trying to, you know, crank down the parking requirements for each project to, you know, discourage multiple car ownership and things like that, really encourage people to, you know, utilize transit and not rely so much on vehicles. So, you know, there's sort of this delicate balance where we're getting pressure from all sides. And I think where we ended up is providing some on-street parking. It can just ease the pressure a little bit. It can be a place where visitors to those residences can conveniently park near the entrances. It can be a little bit of overflow for the residents themselves. It just eases things a little bit. It doesn't necessarily have to be viewed as a permanent solution. I think there is an opportunity to continually let this corridor evolve over time as you know, uses come in, as use patterns you know, change and develop over time. So, you know, it's really getting down to the fine tuning of the plan, and sometimes it is a judgment call. So I just wanted to interject that perspective.
I actually appreciate that input. You know, obviously if it's a drop-off zone, white zone, you know, 20 minutes, you know, some type of quick, you're not gonna have cars lining the street. It at least helps a little bit. But having, you know, long-term 2-hour parking that's gonna fill up, you know, for residents coming in and out, well, now you're just creating a big old wall of steel that you can't see the bicyclists. So, you know, I do see that, you know, obviously you can be some flexibility as long as it's not long-term parking, or, you know, if it's, you know, drop-off loading zones, Uber drivers, it's, you know, that should be okay because they're not staying. They're not going to sit there permanently blocking the view. But, you know, I think in the long term, you know, I don't think it's worth people's lives to save, you know, minimal parking that is supposed to serve a community that's not supposed to have cars anyways by design.
Right, and I would also agree that if we designate it as like class 4 bike lanes should be designed now rather than, because that's a big infrastructure improvement. And then also, you know, we should do more to help that side of El Camino to have, you know, safety, open space. You know, it could be looked at again as equity issues. If it's higher density developments, a lot more people, a lot more congestion, a lot more problems, then we try to solve those problems and make it fair for them now. You know, they could see across the street on the west side of El Camino, all the open space with ample parking and shops and restaurants, and say, why isn't our side of the street like that? And we have to deal with all these other issues and kids getting hurt and riding their bikes or so forth. Yeah.
To the chair, I mean, I'd like to make some progress here as far as promoting like things I think we should include in comments going forward. I think, you know, trying at this point we've had good conversations.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I try to push a little bit on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
I started to make a short list so far. So.
Okay, so there's some policy things that I'd love to see that are a little bit modified, because we talked about this being a policy document, not a specific document entailing every detail that we want to include. I do believe we need to have a marijuana zone policy here in there. We've got to put it in there somewhere.
This is something that's hitting every city across the Bay Area. People are talking about, San Bruno's been dealing with it. It's a conflict topic. Just put a designation that we are or not allowing it, where it's gonna be, and let city council decide.
Can I,
Go ahead.
I think city council's already said we don't have any right now. It's already an ordinance,
Then-
right? Don't we have a moratorium ordinance, something that they said, put in place a few years ago? No retail?
It's been decided. It was decided
Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago. So I don't, unless you're looking for a change in policy, it's an existing policy.
Well, I think it'd be nice to put it actually in one of our zones, in the smoke shops or in the, where we designate it then. At least list it here. This is zoning law.
But the city's decided it doesn't want the use.
Okay, so we have just a blanket ban. We don't have to worry about where it's zoned or.
Exactly.
Okay,
For
okay.
now, that's what we've got.
All right, that's clarifying. Thank you. The intent I mentioned earlier about putting a statement in this policy about our intent to keep the parking that would overflow from our high-density housing into local residential, that we need to state very directly. We talked about, possible parking permits in the future, things like that. We need to state that the intent is to restrict overflow parking from high-density housing that's supposed to be low-car usage. State it. That is the intent. It's a policy. It's what we're trying to achieve as a goal. I'd like to see that in there somewhere. I'd like to see us address the fire safety plan for open spaces within Millbrae, or direct me to it, because I'm still listening. I see that we have, obviously, outside of Millbrae or these danger zones. But at least let's put in place some statement saying, look, we will have a fire evaluation on an interval, or how that's going to be achieved.
There is a HSHM 8.6 wildfire risk reduction.
Which page? Or which document?
It's a policy in the general plan. And then under the hazard section.
It's on page 715.
715. I'm hoping it satisfies my inclinations of what we need to have. Which page? 715.
That's right, 8.6.
Local risk assessment map. Do we have one of those already? Is that something we were going to build then?
It's either, so this policy is that the city is going to recognize any identified areas in the city as wildfire risk designated by the Office of State Marshal or by approved local risk assessment map. I don't believe we do have a local risk assessment map. We do have a map that shows the fire sensitivity areas.
Yeah, I guess I like these two parts. One is it could be from the state fire marshal, but it could be also from the local risk assessment map. Can we define that is the city-generated local risk assessment map?
We could clarify that. And
just clarify the city's going to generate one, is what I'm saying.
Sure.
Okay. Well, that would satisfy me for that critical component. So as far as the sort of go, no-go things I really feel are critical is, the Bayside Manor connectivity. I'm glad that we have a solution for that coming. I think that's a great way to go. Obviously, this satisfies, you include that word, the Millbrae for the fire. I'll skip over the marijuana zone policy, having learned from our city legal that's covered. And then the statement of intent for what parking restrictions between the overflow would be. And while I don't mind keeping protected bike lane, I mind keeping class 4, just remove the term from the entire document of biking or parking protected. The term is wrong. Yes.
Could you restate your? I'm trying to take notes.
Sure.
I'm a very slow typer. So we were trying to get down the specifics of your concern, the parking policy that you wanted, that's stated in the intent. So could you repeat that?
I would like to.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'll let, he has to talk now.
Right. Well, that's good. I'm a fast talker, so I get why you couldn't keep up typing. That we talk about, obviously, that we need to have a policy, but to state that the intent of the policy is to control the overflow of parking from high-density housing areas that are supposed to be low automotive usage into residential neighborhoods nearby. Just state that that is the intent of these rules. So it's guiding for when we go to make policies and changes, that it meets the intent.
Thank you.
All right. And as I said, the last thing is, it's not even about removing protected lanes, just remove the term parking protected from bike lanes. I mean, I literally say no to a policy, to the document over that statement. That's how important this is as somebody who's actually founded the BPAC for Millbrae at some point with John Kiefer.
So the word parking is the problem? You said
No,
protected is
yeah,
okay?
parking protected, yes. Parking protected is fine.
Protected is fine. So
Protected
the
bike lane,
parking part.
class 4 bike lane, that's an actual legal definition. Just don't call it parking protected. And we can sort out the parking part later.
Couple of final comments, if I might. Again, if we're looking at doing additional studies, again, looking at environmental design to address wind, noise, calming, restore native plantings, have a list of native plants to use of different heights to encourage, besides our native palm trees, add architectural design elements to mixed-use buildings. There's some emphasis in the general plan that it says we lack character, buildings lack character, articulation, et cetera. There could be a lot more development of architectural design standards for these buildings, including color palettes. I think a fun thing to do would be to adopt city trees, city birds, city animals, color schemes, so we have some consistency and some character to our city and distinguish it from other neighboring cities also. We should adopt or think about doing something fun like that. We can engage the public in that. Environmental design, as I mentioned, there's one section here in the general plan document. I've been reviewing, unfortunately, the previous draft. It was 2.9C, which states, design review process for residential, commercial, and mixed-use developments. The city shall review and update design review process for residential, commercial, and mixed-use projects. The city shall revise the process to assist city staff and decision makers in their decision-making process and applicability of objective design standards. Good. This review and update shall consider the adoption of a director's administrative decision process that provides for discretionary staff review as an alternative to requiring planning commission review. The process for which we review projects in our city, I have concerns because a lot of times by the time these large mixed-use developments come before the planning commission, they're practically designed, built. The developers are likely unwilling to change a lot of the plans. They put so much effort, hundreds of thousands of dollars into their planning, design, drawings, and by the time it comes to us, there's little chance for public review and input and make changes. I say we need more input in the review process for these larger developments, including seeing the concept before the permit is issued. So that means that if there's a large mixed-use development, like I was kind of upset about the Office Depot development, if there's a large mixed-use residential, primarily residential-focused development that's sitting right in the middle of our downtown, it transitions our downtown core into something different, like walking into someone's backyard or neighborhood, and potentially envisioning, seeing it discourages people from coming downtown and having a vibrant core, which we're trying to achieve, instead of people thinking, that's someone else's, large building and I don't belong there. So I would suggest striking 2.9, that section of 2.9C, director's administrative decision process. There is discretion for the staff when to present these projects to us. My concern and suggestion is to make sure these large developments come to us before the permitting process, so we can take a look at that and also engage the public and get their response too. That was one of the final comments I had. Green rooftops, I'm not sure if they really could account for open space. I'm more for frontages and engaging and welcoming public storefronts, having bigger setbacks. I don't think there should be a limit on the maximum setback that these developments should have. If they want to put in more open space in front, maybe to put in tennis courts or basketball courts or outdoor dining, I'd say that we shouldn't limit them on that. That would be great for engaging community and creating outdoor living spaces and making it more vibrant. There's a table there with setbacks, and it mentions in there frontages of buildings with minimum and maximum setbacks. You might want to look at that and eliminate the maximum setbacks for those. Again, I mentioned innovative parking solutions. We should look at parklets. I was concerned about the zoning, which was orange for the parking next to Magnolia. I think that these parking lots, city lots, should keep some amount of open space and develop them as green spaces and parklets. Again, we're getting more dense, more people. We need to provide more open space for them. Developing, for example, the parking lot with the farmer's market, if we develop that into a true little parklet that can provide greenery and calming and a destination that people will really love and improve that farmer's market area, and add more little parklet areas like that instead of converting all the city spaces that are available that are now used for parking to mixed-use residential and primary residential focused. Make sure we maintain some green space, because less developers are less likely to provide that open space, and we can provide that for calming for residents too. Okay. And again, I submitted all my comments, all 80 plus of them, and listed the page number or section number, made it really easy for you to incorporate. I hope you consider those in the package to the council.
Thank you. Do you have-
Chair, yeah, if I could respond to one notable comment that I heard, striking the implementation program C, which is the design review process for residential commercial mixed-use projects. So I hear very clear that the concern of the commissioner is that the commission wants a little bit more clarity, more input on design review projects. This implementation program is intended to do that, to provide more clarity, more direction on what design standards the commission should be looking for, and that's kind of one of the items is to adopt objective design standards, which we are currently in the process of doing. The director's administrative decision process is really a minor decision process for minor projects or discretionary applications, such as, for example, conditional use permits in downtown, or in which currently we require in the DIA conditional use permits for some tenant improvements. So the intent is really for those minor projects, not that these larger projects would go through the director's decision. We'll always ensure that larger projects, multifamily, commercial, will go through the planning commission process, and that there will be more clarity, more standards in which the commission will evaluate these projects. So in sum, I recommend that we keep that in, and noting the fact that the commissioner Wong would like to provide more direction in terms of the design review process and what design actually entails in terms of evaluating the project and to approve or deny.
So you have to provide that description within this text, and that would be, I think, acceptable.
Can I just add something? The key here is we're going to be revising them to create objective design standards, right? That is where we're trying to move to, have given something concrete to work with. so we're not just completely willy-nilly. And the, coming up with the director's administrative decisions would allow us to help streamline, as you said, smaller things, right?
Right.
Things that might not even come to the planning commission, or a change, perhaps we've approved a project and a change needs to be made. I mean, those are the kinds of things we're talking about.
Right, like a conditional use permit for a restaurant.
And when it comes to big projects, we can't, as a body, can't react to anything until it's designed. And developers work with the staff working with our guidelines to come up with something. And we also have study sessions ahead of time. We don't, for bigger projects, we don't just see them at, with 2 days' notice and we're done. So it isn't true that we don't have time to reflect on these projects. And we have to have a project to reflect on. We aren't the designers. That's not our job. Our job is to decide if the design will work for us. And our staff is supposed to do that for us. And that's what they do with the developers, right?
Right,
I
right.
get the process here straight.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
For that 2.9C, if Michael Conran is on, we want to make sure that we don't bypass the public review process. So is this 2.9C, is that consistent with the public review process? Okay, if Mike is not available.
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here. I wasn't able to track 2.9 of what? Which
General Plan 2040, General Plan Draft September 2022. That's page 2-29.
Attachment 3.
2-2, no, I have it.
It's the last item in the table there.
Sorry. My hard copy is different from your,
It's section 2.9 implementation programs, and then there's a table with programs A, B, C. Let me jump down to C.
page 2-9?
2-29.
Sorry.
Or if someone can pull that up.
Mike.
I have it. Hold it. Okay, so C.
The director's administrative decision process. We don't know who the director is, do we? It doesn't specify the exact title of city staff.
Director, Community Development Director. I believe we do have some processes where there is a staff level review. And that's certainly legal. It seemed that your comment was more that you wanted perhaps not to have that.
Right, because it says as an alternative to requiring planning commission review, so it appears to indicate that it bypasses the public review process.
It would. The alternative is that every decision comes to the commission. So I think this policy is to review the process, not to implement something. So the idea is to look at it, I think, and determine whether or not it would make sense to have a staff level review. And I think the difficult thing there is coming up with a threshold as to when it would go from staff level review to to commission review, and that there could be a noticing process and perhaps an appeal. So that's I think what's being suggested there. So I mean I guess your alternative is just that everything should come to the commission.
If it's a major project, it should, but this leaves it open to discretion of staff, but it could be.
Well, it's not.
Do that.
If I could make a suggestion, what if we were to strike out the last portion of the sentence that says, so the sentence would read, the review and update shall consider adoption of director's administrative decision process for minor discretionary permits. not an alternative to planning commission review. So whatever planning commission reviews currently will still be reviewed. And then we could just have I mean, it is an existing process. We do have staff level review for second story additions less than 500 square feet.
So basically, right now, we don't have a formal process, right? Is that what we're saying?
No, we do.
We have a process.
We do have a
Okay.
process, yes.
Review and update shall consider the adoption of a director's administrative decision process that provides for discretionary staff review. But, I mean, we already do that, right?
Yes.
Yes.
As an alternative, though, for.
Yeah, so this is basically saying, for example, a conditional use permit for a restaurant. We have two on Broadway that we're reviewing for consideration for the planning commission in a future public meeting. Those in staff's view are minor enough. We could evaluate the use of the restaurant, hours of operation, and provide a determination at the staff level. But we still also have the ability to defer to the planning commission in instances where we think the larger public interest would be best served from a planning commission written public hearing.
So minor might be a way to do it, or, I just had it and I've lost it, where appropriate.
Where appropriate.
You know what I mean? It's not for every single project. It's not for big projects. It's
And,
little.
and just to be really clear, this is to consider whether or not you want to do that, whether or not you want to have such a process. It's not implementing that process. It's considering whether or not you want to. Is there, should you discuss what that dividing line could be? Nobody's deciding what that dividing line is here. You're just saying, should you have a process to consider it?
It's part of this review that they want to do.
Right.
Yeah, and I also add that the process is codified in the zoning code, which projects would be reviewed at staff level and which projects are reviewed at the planning commission level. So any changes to the zoning code would have to go through the planning commission and the city council. So that process will be under will be under review by the planning commission whether that process is a good process or we want to change or we'll have some input there.
Chair Davis, can I make a observation about the objective design standards? The state laws that are requiring local government to prepare objective design standards for residential projects are intended to eliminate discretionary review of residential projects that are consistent with design and development standards. Development standards we're all familiar with: height, bulk, setbacks. Design standards typically have been guidelines rather than standards, so they're objective standards. But the theory is that once you've established those, and we're working on those with your staff right now, that residential projects that are consistent with those standards are ministerial review by the staff, and they get a building permit. There's no discretion. Some of our jurisdictions that we are working with, the planning commission said, that's fine, they're objective standards, but we want to be the ones that confirm compliance with objective standards. And so those ministerial review projects still go through the planning commission, but you don't have discretion other than to determine that they're consistent with the standards that you've already established. So there are a couple of ways of doing that. This implementation program kind of embraces or addresses another aspect a little bit beyond the objective design standards, which is whether or not you want to create some administrative approvals that stay at the staff level that might require discretion on the staff's part. Sometimes those are called minor use permits in zoning codes, other terms for them. But so that's a slightly different element. So we've mixed up kind of two issues here, and maybe we should modify this program to kind of really be clear on what the intent of that is, and it is really driving the objective design standards.
Right. I would appreciate that.
Thank you. More?
Yeah, actually, moving to this portion of the document, I was reminded of something that I forgot to mention earlier. So the storm drain master plan, it's program J on page 232, which says it implements policy 10.7. I didn't see a 10.7. I guess it somehow got dropped, or it's a typo from something. But I also noticed that the time horizon when this would start is not until 2026. So I don't know how often these storm drain master plans get updated, but you know, it seems like within the last year we've had quite a few instances of obvious gaps in the system that should be addressed. So I mean, I don't know what the capacity of Public Works is to tackle this in the next 3 years, but it does seem like something that this needs to be revisited sooner rather than later.
If I may, a couple of points. We kind of have a part of our general plan practice to recommend that those kinds of master plans be updated every 5 years. Similar to what the urban water management plan is, that's directed by state law in terms of the updates, but locally generated master plans, sewer plans, drainage plans, typically the typical time frame is 5 years. When we're preparing these time frames for the recommendations for the implementation programs, because they're all responsibility of the city and mostly city staff or consultants that you hire, we try to provide a balance in terms of a near term, mid-term, and long-term implementation. Sometimes everybody feels like they should be implemented right away. So we try to spread things out a little bit, but if the commission feels like because of these recent flooding issues that you had, that's a higher priority, then I would suggest recommending that to the council that priority or the implementation timeframe be moved up. So that could be a recommendation from the commission.
Excuse me, Chair.
I just wanted to point out, Tom Williams has his hand up. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Tom.
Chair, thank you. Good evening. To you, good evening, Planning Commission staff, all the consultants, Tom Williams, City Manager. I just wanted to address this issue as Commissioner Chan has brought it up several times on the drainage. So we are working through that. The City of Millbrae is unique because we rely on other outside governmental agencies such as the City and County of San Francisco and SFO to maintain a storm system that the City of Millbrae drains into. The Lomita Canal is a major canal system that's instrumental to our storm system that created some flooding on Landing Lane over the past several years. And the reason for that is SFO had failed to properly maintain the Lomita Canal. And this past year, working with Congresswoman Spears' office, we were able to get the attention of SFO, and they're in the process of clearing Lomita Canal so it can properly drain. And that is, and I can brief at a later date, maybe we have a study session or more specifics on the way the storm drain works. But for the record, I wanted to mention that our reliance on other outside agencies, specifically SFO, and their lack of maintaining the Lomita Canal, we have found was an issue that caused the flooding in the Landing Lane area. But the good news is they're doing a diligent effort clearing the canal. It's the first time they've done that in over 20 years. And so we continue to hope that they do that frequently, and we don't get in a situation that we found ourselves in the last couple of years. So I just want to go on the record and mention that and be happy to address this issue on another agenda item or study session with the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Is it a typo in the table that it says it addresses LU 10.7? Is that supposed to be 10.6? Okay. Could you? The storm drain master plan.
J, it's on page 232.
Yeah, there is no 10.7.
10.6.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so just circle that one.
10.6.
Nathan, anything else?
No. Do we have a do we have a motion or anything like that?
I think we're mighty close here. I got my little list, and I think we're on the same page. Yep. Mm-hmm. Why don't you try and make that motion then?
Oh, gosh.
He hates that.
Where's the document?
Oh, it's here somewhere here. I have it clipped here.
I got so many documents I don't even know where it is anymore.
So there are two to make.
Oh, dear goodness. I got a silly Sally sat. Practice my tongue. Okay, so we have attachment 1 and attachment 2. Which one should we start with?
Attachment 1, that's the
Attachment
council,
1.
right?
All right. This is the resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Millbrae recommending that the Millbrae City Council adopt the Millbrae 2040 General Plan Update, Downtown and El Camino Real Specific Plan, related zoning code amendments, and the updated Millbrae zoning map, City of Millbrae.
With
With
a few changes.
with a few changes, yes.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. If I can make a suggestion, that there's a lot of discussion and dialogue. We will have detailed minutes of this meeting to forward to the council. And then that the comments that were raised this evening will be considered by the council.
Okay. With the following comments, then.
Well, that's fine to give them detailed minutes, but there's a few things, only a handful that we really
are
are more serious about. Those are the ones that if you can make the change between this draft to that draft, that would be outstanding.
And
Yes.
And they can, change their mind if they don't like our ideas, but
And I think we already had agreement from Mr.
Yeah.
Harnish and
Yep.
you guys that you're willing to make some of these modifications to meet those.
it's really not many. I mean,
Right. Why don't you go ahead and start with yours then?
well, I mean, that you said you would be able to add something into perhaps the mobility or the safety section about the in and out access to the two east side neighborhoods, to address those kind of concerns. And you would like to add the intent to the parking about trying to keep extra cars out of the neighborhoods and the class 4 bike lane. I think that's it.
Remove the parking.
Right,
In the term.
parking protected.
Okay.
And then the wildfire thing got covered. There was something else, but it got covered. Oh,
The add
cannabis-
add the word
cannabis
Millbrae into the fire plan for the definition of who's defining the fire plan.
Oh, that's right. There was one word you wanted to change in there, or just add city instead of just plain local.
Yep. And you're going to get clarity on the pool and whether or not the Helen pool is zoned or not zoned properly was the only thing I could think of.
Correct.
And then any, obviously any random typos we found, those will be in the minutes, so we don't have to worry about those.
I did have the one comment about the street cleanliness in partnership with the city, with the businesses. Did you have any feeling about whether or not that's a comment worthwhile, or just keep it in the general comments and hope
I
that?
read it. I didn't think it needed a change. I think it's fine in the minutes part.
Okay, I'll leave it there.
There was also an agreement that the consultant would also develop an action plan to include identify other further action elements such as wind studies, environmental design studies. We have here, and so forth, with city staff.
No?
Can you get clarification what exactly you're referencing?
Right, when Mr. Harnish mentioned that he could work with city staff to develop an action plan for developing or completing studies to address plan details, developments, such as environmental or wind calming studies across the city, and sound.
I didn't hear that at all.
Is this relevant to the
Yes, a
airport?
program to address the issues that you are raising, the connectivity and safety issues for the east of El Camino neighborhoods that were between on the east side between El Camino and 101. But I'm not. I don't remember taking notes about an additional implementation program. So if you could clarify that.
Right, as I mentioned before, that there's a baseline that we have for the EIR for sound and wind or environmental standards such as sound. And that was, as the consultant mentioned, baseline of 2021. But then I mentioned that we have tremendous impacts from the airport, from the freeways, from the trains, that our baseline should be lower, that there should be more studies done to see how we can reduce those impacts of sound, light, noise, and include addressing those such as vegetative barriers or solutions, identify solutions such as sound walls along the freeway or vegetative barriers, or come up with some solutions to address these issues.
If I may, yeah. So, Commissioner Wong, I believe you're referencing to the EIR. Those baseline studies that were done are existing conditions. So, there were studies that were done and actual technical documents that measured the existing conditions at that time, at the time the notice of preparation was prepared. So, those are fact. Those are documented what exists today. For future developments, the baseline studies would be different because in the future, the noise could be different and wind directions could be different. So we'll evaluate that as part of the CEQA process for individual developments to see where appropriate siting is and noise mitigation, things like that.
And for this document, that is for our baseline.
Yeah, this document, just document again the existing conditions as it is today.
It's not a wishful thinking thing, it's just the way it was when we started this process. Yep.
So let me add that the general plan right now includes in the noise element portion, noise policies, noise standards for noise levels for various kinds of land uses. The zoning code includes a noise ordinance that can be is enforced for certain noise issues. So the city has established noise policies. I wouldn't call them baseline. They're basically industry standards for noise levels for sensitive noise receptors.
So that's all understood, and as I mentioned, I understand that the 21 is the baseline, but again, I don't believe that, I believe that we should improve upon that because we have all these issues, environmental issues to deal with that maybe we can come up with some solutions, and including in the development of our city, if we're able to manage the environment and restore plantings and plant according to environmental design so that we break up wind and provide calming and sound, which we hear constantly through the neighborhood. And especially in those neighborhoods like east of El Camino, again, they get the brunt of it. I don't believe that, I guess there is the baseline, there are decibels, but those studies are done like by the airport also, so I believe we should have our own independent studies done about the health and welfare of citizens with addressing those issues.
And the other issue you mentioned was light.
Right, light.
There's, in some communities, we deal with the issue of night skies or nights. There's a whole night sky movement. And some zoning ordinances include night sky provisions that limit light. It's a pretty difficult thing to implement in built-out urban areas like Millbrae that are typically more successful in smaller, more rural communities that already are starting at a different baseline, lower light levels. So that's possible, but that was not contemplated here. There are no policies related to light. There are regulations in your zoning code related to light spilling from one property to another. So there are, and I don't know how detailed are some zoning codes that we work on have really detailed provisions for that. So that could be a venue that we look at.
Right, again, I guess we're dealing with a baseline, understand the foundation of the document and the purpose of the EIR, but Tom Williams, if you're listening, again, you know, I believe that baseline is set very low bar because we deal with a lot of issues. I mean, even the light from the airport, it just, you know, it illuminates the entire city skylight at nighttime, at least where I live, and probably a good part of the city. So I'm trying to revert us and lower our baseline if we can and study how we can do that and improve our city, since we're talking about city planning and improving our city.
Thank you.
Is there an element to this for the motion that I should add on there?
I mean, does it belong in the general plan, or are ordinances already in place? I mean, as a project comes along and we say, what can you do to mitigate light? What can you do to mitigate noise? I mean, do we already have mechanisms to deal with this?
Yeah, I mean, that's, those are environmental impacts, and so that would be reviewed under the California Environmental Quality Act. So as for projects, I propose ensure that the CEQA is complied with, and whether that project, you know, emits glare, light on adjacent properties, that sort of thing will be reviewed during that development review process.
Madam Chair, could I
Yes, go ahead.
just wanted to add, I think it's just important to remember, and without, you know, disparaging the commissioner's vision, which I totally understand, and it's something that certainly the city can do through its policy process. Just the word baseline is a very important technical term under the California Environmental Quality Act, and there's been just lots of litigation over it. I just, you know, to put it simply, it's really not something you want to mess with. But that's only for the purpose of doing the environmental impact report. It has nothing to do with how you know, what policies you might want to suggest or other changes. But I think we really don't want to get in terms of trying to change the baseline. The law is pretty clear, and I say pretty clear, it's not completely clear. The baseline is what it is when you start the environmental study, and that's very generally accepted. There have been a few exceptions where people have been allowed to modify that slightly just to show a particular project. Perhaps it's not going to start for many years, and they want to show what's going to happen there. But other than that, it's really not a topic we want to change. Absolutely, though, doesn't mean all those topics are off the map or any you can't discuss. I mean, they certainly are open. I just say when we do a CEQA study, in order to, you know, really protect the city and not get us into litigation, we do not want to start creating alternative baselines. It's just a recipe for trouble. Again, that should not intervene with your vision of what you'd like to achieve in terms of reducing all those impacts that are in the baseline. You certainly can go below the baseline. That's up to you. But in terms of when we do a CEQA study, I think we're really constrained in what we can do. Otherwise, it really creates some mischief. So just with that comment.
Thank you. All righty.
Nothing to add as far as the exact language on.
I don't think so.
Sorry, nothing to add.
I had wanted to see if there was appetite for this from the rest of the commission. So I think both Commissioner Wong and I mentioned that we felt like there were some parts of the map that could be shifted from residential focused mixed use to a more intensive use. Was there anyone else on the commission who felt likewise?
I don't, and especially because Nestor said density bonuses make those things irrelevant anyway.
Okay.
You may get a more intense development without having to change the heights.
Okay. Well, I was talking about the designation, which includes also the density. I understand what you mean about the heights.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean,
I'm not in favor of it only because this process has been very long and there's been
Okay.
a lot of public input that went into those, and I'm not ready to mess with them tonight. I think too much input's gone into it to come to those decisions, to make more changes now.
I would,
including going through the council.
Okay,
I
yeah,
would
that,
concur with the
that's,
chair as well.
that's totally fine.
I would concur with the chair as well.
Okay, so do we have, your motion is,
My motion's on the table. We haven't added anything on to the last one I mentioned.
okay,
Right, and
Is there
you're
a
feel
second?
comfortable with what we've captured at this point. You'll go back to video if you need to, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
is there a second?
Oh, motion.
Thank you. We have a second. Please add your votes. I think we're done?
Motion passes 4-0. Thank you.
And then there's a second.
Yeah. Well, I have to wait for it to clear.
Oh, clear the board, yeah.
And I'd like to make a second motion. I make a motion for pass a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Millbrae recommending that the Millbrae City Council certify the environmental impact report for the Millbrae 2040 General Plan, Downtown and El Camino Real Specific Plan, and zoning code and map amendments.
Excellent. Second? Okay. Votes? Think we're done?
Done? Oops.
Oops.
I'm pushing the button, but it's not doing anything.
Just
Okay.
push it hard.
Okay, there we go.
There we go.
Thank you. That motion passes 4-0.
Yahoo! One more huge hurdle passed onto the city council.
That's a big one. Congratulations.
That is immense. Thank you, staff. Thank you, all of you, the entire team. There's people who aren't here that have come and gone, but they helped. This is immense. And I know Commissioner Quick, who couldn't be with us tonight, wants to thank you all as well. Yeah, this is gigantic.
Can I say I actually really appreciated the partnership that goes into the flexibility of reaching some of those things. That was very well done. I appreciate that, especially to Mr. Harnish.
Thank you. Alrighty.
Hey, Chair, real quick, I would just like to say thank you to the Planning Commission tonight and all the work that you've done throughout this, and certainly the Minter Harnish team and Jim Harnish and his team behind all this. So congratulations, job well done. Thank you for your commitment
Thank you.
and the great progress. Appreciate it.
Alrighty. Almost lost my agenda, but I found it. And all this paper. New business, we don't have any. Staff updates? You've been doing something else besides this? Is there anything else you want to share with us?
The only update this evening, as a result of all your hard work this evening, and also the fact that we have no items for the next planning commission meeting, we'll be canceling the next scheduled planning commission
Alrighty,
meeting.
and that one is, when's it supposed to be?
That's originally scheduled for 10/17.
10/17, no meeting? Alrighty,
So that,
alright,
and we'll see you likely sometime in November.
thank you. No.
No.
And does anybody have any announcements they'd like to make?
Right.
No?
One thing I forgot to mention is that on Thursday next week, the city community development department will be making the Citizens Academy presentation, and there's 15 Citizens Academy attendees, and it'll be myself, City Attorney Michael Conneran, the building official Kivan Rajat, that will will be making the community development section presentation along with Parks and Recreation that evening. So,
That's fantastic. I hope more people can join the academy at some point. Learning about how the city works, all of its departments, is immense and will help people know how they can help and what's going on in this town. So thank you for doing that. It's going to be a big, job for you to get ready for that as well.
Yep.
So what else? What else we got coming up? Coastal Cleanup Day this weekend, yes? 9:30 at Central Park, if you want to join in as a volunteer. It's not just the coast, it's anywhere in town. We just pick up litter for the most part. That's what it is about cleaning up. We've got a Beats and Brews coming up on the 20th, and it's Oktoberfest is the theme for that one. That's fun. Man and Woman of the Year dinner is next Friday. And I'm sure the Rotary's having their festive carnival somewhere close to Halloween, but I don't know the date, perhaps the Saturday or Sunday before. Nothing else?
There's the art show on the 22nd.
Oh, yes.
Kids Carnival's on the 30th.
Thank you. The Sunday. All right, if that's it, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, commissioners.